A woman who lives by her looks. A vain woman who used her beautiful face to attach herself to the luxury of a ducal house. An extremely shallow woman. That was how the world judged the Duke of Dibben's mistress, Lavina Barrow. As she sat before the bed, brushing her hair, she froze when she heard them. Not far away, 3 people were gossiping about her clothes and mannerisms. Everything she wore looked priceless, and they spoke ill of her charms. They said she flirted with every man she saw and called her a mistress with no shame. Just then, a knight came in and said, "Miss Barrow, His Grace is waiting in the carriage." The conversation was interrupted. Only then did the 3 realize she had been there the whole time. She said she would go at once. The carriage rolled down the road. The 2 sat in silence. She turned her head to look out the window. The Duke asked why she seemed upset again. Klein of Dibbins said, "Didn't you get what you wanted?" She could only say that she wasn't upset. He had taken time out of his busy schedule to accompany her, and she was grateful. She had just said the opera performance that day was wonderful when he lifted her chin and demanded to know why she was sulking. Did he now have to watch her expression before saying or doing anything? Lavina felt wronged. The ridicule from others still seemed to hover before her eyes, but she had no way to tell him directly. She only said she was tired and had let it affect her mood, that she knew she was wrong. But the Duke did not forgive her. Instead, he chose to punish her. He held out his hand and told her to remove his glove. She reached for it, but he refused, telling her to use her mouth instead. Lavina was startled, her heart pounding. The Duke thought she was unwilling. Embarrassed, she murmured, "No, I'll do it." Hearing her answer, the Duke smiled. Red with shame, Lavina stepped forward and helped him remove his glove. The Duke could not resist leaning in. The 2 kissed in the carriage. Only the sound of their heartbeats echoed inside. The next day, a maid said, "His Grace was in a very good mood yesterday. He sent you flowers and even shoes." But Lavina was not happy. The maid, however, envied her. A commoner like her could go without food or drink for 3 months and still not save enough for the cheapest opera ticket. The maid asked what her dream was. Lavina answered to become a novelist. Her uncle was a famous novelist, until Remy continued writing even now. Her uncle had once told her that if she ever felt tired, she could come back at any time. Then the maid remembered he was a horror writer, very famous indeed. They said he kept himself shut away at home and cut off contact with the outside world. She was curious what he looked like. Since he was her uncle, he was probably a handsome middle-aged man. Maybe. Lavina did not know. Perhaps she would never get the chance to see him again. The last time they met had been 3 years ago, when she left with an excited heart to become a novelist. She had set out for the capital. If only she had not run into the Duke on that train back then. From the very start, she should never have been fooled by a friend's sweet words and come to the capital so decisively. Just then, someone entered her room. "Miss Barrow, I need to speak with you. May I come in?" Lavina allowed her in. It was Mrs. Ludd, the estate housekeeper. She had come so early to tell Lavina that she would be moving to Lupud. "But isn't it the height of the social season there now?" Lavina asked. Mrs. Ludd replied that the schedule had been moved up. Lavina suspected something had happened to the Duke, and this time His Grace would not be going with her. She was shocked to hear that, but she had no right to ask about the Duke's affairs. Mrs. Ludd said she would instruct the servants to begin packing tomorrow, and Lavina could probably leave by noon the day after. "Oh, and there's a letter for you as well. It seems to be from a publishing house." That made Lavina happy, and Mrs. Ludd noticed everything. When the door closed again, Mrs. Ludd went to the Duke's office. The Duke was working intently. After reporting that she had completed her task, Mrs. Ludd asked him when he intended to drive Lavina away. His aunt, Marchioness Ashes, had told him that a few days earlier Her Majesty the Queen had received the daughter of a powerful overseas family. It seemed she wanted to play matchmaker again. No one knew what she was planning this time. Hearing the Duke's words, Mrs. Ludd's face turned pale. It seemed Miss Lavina no longer had any value to him. Her Majesty had once asked him whether he was provoking her. Was he deliberately choosing a lover who resembled his dead fiancé in appearance? She warned him not to think she was blind to his little schemes. The Duke glanced over and said he did not cling to the dead, nor would he ever make Lavina his lawful wife. He only hoped people would stop trying to pair him with foreign princesses or heiresses. And so, Lavina had remained the only woman by the Duke of Dibben's side. But now 3 years had passed. Even after all this time, he had shown no intention of casting his mistress out. The queen was growing anxious. Mrs. Ludd said that young lady was also a blonde, blue-eyed beauty, and after seeing her in person, the Marchioness even said she resembled his late fiancée more than Miss Barrow did. Hearing that, the Duke laughed. He said he had long forgotten what that dead woman looked like. It seemed everyone assumed he still could not forget the woman he had loved in his youth. But on the day he returned from the funeral, he had met Lavina on the train and fallen in love with her at first sight. Even if she had lost her usefulness, he would not abandon her. To him, she was a lovely pet, and the Duke was not worried about marriage arrangements. Mrs. Ludd wanted to say more, but he waved her away. Even so, before leaving, Mrs. Ludd still planted one more thorn. Miss Barrow seems to have a man. The carriage moved along the road in the morning. Lavina clutched the letter in her hand, full of worry. The maid beside her was uneasy. "This is Harlan Street. Didn't you say we were going to the department store?" And there were men's clothes in her bag. Lavina told her she needed her to keep it secret, and that she would explain everything later. Her parents had gone on their honeymoon years after marrying, only to die of an infectious illness during the trip. She was left an orphan. Her mother's younger brother, Uncle Till Remy, took her in. And so, she spent 20 years in a remote little village. On the day she came of age, she received a letter saying he had settled in the capital and wanted her to come stay for a few days. Without hesitation, she boarded a train bound for the capital. But everything turned out to be a trap. A friend had borrowed an enormous sum of money in her name. She had no choice but to run everywhere in hiding. That friend had actually expected her to repay the debt. After finally escaping pursuit, she was filled with regret. If only she had listened to her uncle and never come to the capital. At that moment, a carriage stopped in front of her. Klein stepped out and approached her. She turned to flee, but the Duke caught her. He understood her situation and was willing to help her. She still went with him, and that led to the life she lived now, with people everywhere calling her a shameless woman. If she had not gone with him, perhaps her relationship with Klein could have begun on more honorable terms. He was a man poor at expressing himself and never said he loved her, but she understood that he did love her. That was exactly why she kept submitting manuscripts. She dressed as a man because she was afraid of running into people who knew her. She had come to meet the head of the publishing house. His name was William Tino, the owner. Using the pen name Felamy, she met with him. The owner said her novel was truly excellent, though a few places needed revising. Her wording was vivid, but the plot was hard for readers to relate to, and the places the protagonist appeared in were too limited. Everyday settings would be easier for the public to accept, but Lavina had never been to such places. The owner told her she should experience them for herself. They would meet at Kooinuwa Park at noon the next day. Before she could refuse, she was ushered out. As for the first part of this story, Duke Klein was actually fairly considerate toward his mistress. When she made mistakes, he would often let them slide. He never restricted Lavina or kept her locked inside the estate. However, even so, there was one unspoken rule in the house. Whenever she returned to the estate, she had to wait in her room for him. But today, she came back late, and the Duke was already there waiting. He had already drunk quite a bit. Lavina entered nervously. Looking at her, he told her to sit. He had come back without even changing his clothes. Then he began telling her a story about how he once kept a dog. Its fur was black and glossy. It was very clever and could even understand human speech. It was a female dog, but one day something happened. It bit through its leash and ran away, disappearing without a trace. Later it returned, but by then it had mated with a stray and was carrying mongrel puppies. Its belly was swollen, and it shamelessly rubbed against his trouser leg as if nothing had happened. Hearing this, Lavina actually found the story curious and asked, and then? The Duke said that when the dog gave birth, he had the stray that fathered the pups brought over and killed all the puppies. The dog even tried to bite him, so he had it put down too. After that, he never kept the dog again. He looked at Lavina knowingly and said that anyone who betrayed him would meet a miserable end. Lavina suspected he had already guessed she had gone to the publisher. He said he would not pursue it this first time since he had other matters to deal with these next few days. As for her moving to Lupud, that will be postponed for now. The next morning, the maid reminded her not to forget today's appointment with the person from the publishing house in the park. Lavina sleepily thought she had not told her about it, but did not think much of it. Melissa already seemed uneasy and after thinking it over, Lavina decided not to go. She was afraid the Duke would misunderstand. To persuade her, Melissa came over and said she had read Lavina's manuscript and thought she was truly talented. She said this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and perhaps Lavina could even sign a contract with the publisher today. Once she returned to Lupud, she would be stuck there for another half year. That made sense, and Lavina finally agreed to go. This time Melissa told her to go by herself, and that she would come pick her up later. Lavina thought Melissa was doing it for her sake and foolishly agreed. Soon, the two met. They chatted together and had tea and pastries. He said ordinary couples often came here. Then he handed her the contract. He also pulled out a flower and gave it to her, saying he liked her writing style and believed she had great potential. Lavina looked at the flower in confusion. Do people give flowers when signing a contract? The owner said it was a gift to celebrate her successful signing. Since it was her first contract, he said he always gave a rose to every writer signing for the first time. Just as Lavina reached out to take it, a flash appeared in the distance. After the contract was stamped, she decided that from now on she would only contact him through Melissa. Today's meeting would be the first and last. Recently, she had been focused on writing. Melissa brought her tea and sweets. Mrs. Ludd said the Duke was not in the capital at the moment, but a full week had already passed. Whenever he went on a trip, he always told Lavina in advance. This time it was very strange. Because of what Melissa had said that morning, Lavina could not sleep that night, wondering whether something had happened to the Duke. When she got up for water, she found the door outside open. Outside, the maids were gossiping. Yesterday, Lord Klein attended a banquet with Count Vanessa's second daughter. This time it looks like marriage is really near. Up until now, everything in the Kentley estate has been managed by Marchioness Ashes. But she's getting old, and once that time comes, the Duke will send her away. And His Grace has stayed single all this time because he couldn't forget the fiancée who died 3 years ago. While listening outside the door, Lavina accidentally kicked over a bucket. The maids began heading toward the room. Just as Lavina thought she was about to be discovered, Mrs. Ludd appeared before them. She told them to watch their tongues, then opened the door. But there was no one inside. Lavina had hidden behind the door. Encouraged by Melissa, Lavina returned to the publishing house. As she walked, she thought about what she had heard the night before and told herself it was only rumor. She had been the Duke's mistress for 3 years and had never once felt that he was deeply attached to some lost first love. In their time together, he had always been attentive and considerate. She had taken the owner's last suggestions and revised the manuscript. A few days earlier, Mrs. Ludd had gone to William and paid him to put on an act. To be honest, though, this woman's manuscript was far better than he had expected. That surprised him. Still, money mattered most, so he agreed to publish her novel. At the same time, he noticed someone outside following her. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the illegitimate son of a count's family, Felix, looked at the man before him and wondered if the sun had risen in the west. What was he doing here? The Duke looked at him and said he was beyond saving. After clearing the room, they began talking business. The southern port was smuggling prohibited alcohol. Ever since the Queen banned the circulation of liquor, Selwood had enforced prohibition. Only a small amount of red wine remained legal. Smuggling was a grave crime, but some people still risked doing it because the profits were enormous. He intended to seize the whole operation. Felix was startled. Wouldn't that be too dangerous? Though he had no standing say-so, the Duke already possessed more than enough. The Duke replied that money was not what mattered. What mattered was power. He also had Felix investigate something else. He had heard that the other man was the owner of a publishing house and had gone to the park and to a restaurant with Miss Barrow, who was dressed as a man. They had supposedly talked about her manuscript. At last, the Duke understood. Next, he planned to go to the row houses to see Lavina. He also ordered that someone be placed beside Mrs. Ludd to watch her. He had heard the Marchioness would be returning today, and by now she should have arrived. Klein, my dear nephew. The two appeared to be talking pleasantly, while Lavina stood to the side, looking lonely. When the Duke looked over, he saw a clear handprint on her face. He asked what slapped her. Not long before, his aunt had come to the house and humiliated Lavina, insisting she take contraceptives. Lavina had argued that the Duke cherished her, and even if she became pregnant, he would never allow anyone to harm his child. Then his aunt had slapped her. Lavina apologized to the Duke, saying it was all her fault. The Duke cast a cold look at his aunt and asked exactly how Lavina had offended her. The woman was so frightened by his expression that she said nothing. Mrs. Ludd quickly said it was a misunderstanding. The Duke took off his coat and asked what kind of misunderstanding it had been. His aunt began to lie, saying Miss Barrow had spilled tea on her coat, so she had simply taught her a lesson. Hearing this, Lavina accepted the false blame too and said she was fine. She asked him not to be angry. The Duke merely told her to close her eyes, cover her ears, and wait for him on the second floor. His tone left no room for refusal, so she had no choice but to flee upstairs. The Duke smashed a teacup at his aunt's feet and said he had merely slipped by accident. Hadn't she always wanted the teacup the Queen had once given his mother? Why hadn't she caught it? Then you'd better catch this one properly. He remembered that she had wanted more than that before. But at that moment, Lavina suddenly rushed up from behind and embraced him, begging him to stop. She said she was afraid and then fainted. When she woke again, she felt terribly thirsty. Melissa was by her bedside and had already prepared water. This was another mansion belonging to the Dibbins family. The maids here said the Duke himself had brought the unconscious Lavina here. Lavina was deeply moved to hear that. Someone entered from outside. Her name was Bianca, the steward of this residence. She had prepared a lavish breakfast for Lavina, all her favorite foods. When Lavina asked about the Duke, Bianca said he had gone early that morning to meet the ministers to discuss this year's tax revenues. It was the first time Lavina had been treated this way, and she was not used to it. Melissa said it was only natural, and the Duke had ordered them to serve her with all their strength, so she should simply be happy here. That evening, the Duke returned. Bianca reported that nothing unusual had happened. By then, Lavina had already come to the stairs to greet him. Knowing he had not eaten, she wanted to dine with him. That night, the two had a candlelit dinner. The place was large, and she still felt unaccustomed to it, but she liked it very much. The people were kind too. The Duke always gave her the finest things, yet she never held extravagant parties or flaunted his wealth. But today he had actually reserved the whole restaurant. He also said that from now on, during every social season, she would live there. Even at a time like this, she still worried about whether the Marchioness knew they had not been punished more severely, and that gave her a little relief. A pure and kind country girl, or a dazzling beauty who played a role? Which one was the real her? The Duke asked whether she knew William. She wondered whether she should tell him the truth, but she felt the Duke would not believe her. Before, in that resort town, the employee who had once helped her had suddenly left the island and stopped doing business altogether. If she told the truth now, Melissa might be dismissed and the publishing house might even be shut down. So she lied, saying William was an old acquaintance. The Duke already knew they had met and that she had dressed as a man. She said they had only shared a meal, but he did not seem convinced. That night, Lavina returned to bathe. Ever since William had been mentioned, the atmosphere had turned heavy. On the way back, the two had barely spoken. She knew the Duke seemed angry. Klein probably did not know her real plans. If he had, he would not have tested her first. He would have acted directly. Yet at that moment, the Duke came straight in and told Melissa to leave. Forced to raise her face, Lavina asked whether she had done something wrong. The Duke said no and simply embraced her. She had already finished bathing. As he seemed ready to leave, she grabbed the edge of his clothes and asked whether he loved her. Had he grown tired of her? Was he planning to abandon her? The Duke said that was hard to say, and at once she understood he had misunderstood her. She wanted to confess, but he gave her no chance. Instead, he told her to stay quietly here. In a small room, a man was being tortured. The Duke asked who was behind him, daring to infiltrate his ranks and steal information. How foolish. All he could say was that those men from the South were too cunning. He had never expected them to guess in advance that the Duke would take action personally. But the Duke had no intention of killing him. Since he had received a gift, he ought to return one. Even collapsed on the ground, the man still warned him that in the end he would die horribly, and so would his woman. The moment he insulted Miss Barrow, the Duke snapped. He had not planned to kill him, but now he ordered the man chopped to pieces and thrown into the harbor. Gino had a headache just thinking about it. If that old man saw it, there would surely be another uproar. And indeed, the old man did see it. He said that no matter how ignorant one was, one must not let the master's hands be stained with blood. Baron Sykes and Gino could not stand each other. If Gino's duty was to handle Klein's affairs in the shadows, then Baron Sykes' duty was to assist Klein in the open. Unlike Gino, who came from humble origins, Sykes was noble to the bone. But the Duke had no interest in their squabbling and simply began outlining the next plan. To keep money flowing, he had secretly established a company called Gelitas. But now more and more people were beginning to suspect him. To avoid drawing further suspicion, they suggested he comply with the queen's arrangements. He had objected before, but now he would accept the political marriage. Too many eyes were fixed on the Duke's every move. The Queen knew he was secretly expanding his power, and that meant Miss Barrow could also be in danger. He would first pretend to obey the Queen, using the woman she had chosen for him as a cover and a shield. He wanted to expand his forces in secret until he possessed power beyond anyone else's reach and could no longer be manipulated. The House of Dibbins was ancient and illustrious, but in Selwood, its actual influence was not so great. The previous Duke of Dibbins had been a taciturn man, and also the Queen's weak-willed younger brother. Klein was born in the second year of a political marriage. Soon after, his father left the ducal house as if relieved of a burden. 10 years later, he and his lover died in a suspicious fire on the battlefield. It was called an accident, but there had been many suspicious points. Benedict had been the one responsible for drafting the prenuptial agreement between the previous Duke and Duchess of Dibbins, so he knew the case very well. If a divorce had been caused by the Duke's fault, he would have owed the Duchess double her dowry as compensation. But with the Duke dead, the widow's pension had to be paid out yearly. Because of that clause, many people suspected there had been a conspiracy. After receiving the pension, Klein's mother had fled back to her homeland without delay, while the Queen bestowed many territories and islands upon the boy left behind. She felt guilty toward this nephew of hers, yet still tried to keep him under her thumb. According to their investigation, he could speak properly with Miss Chloe, the woman chosen by the Queen. She had always longed to escape her father's shadow and build a career of her own. She would make a good partner, and they had already interrogated the witness. He said William and Miss Barrow had met in secret before. The Duke sighed and said William was nothing more than the owner of a publishing house. They had met only because of her manuscript. But Baron Sykes brought in a witness. The witness said Miss Barrow had been unfaithful with William. He claimed she had called Mr. William her first love, that the two had reunited by chance, and that because the Duke would surely abandon her after marriage, she wanted to save enough money before leaving. Baron Sykes smiled with satisfaction. That night, heavy rain fell as the Duke returned, and he believed Baron Sykes' words. And he could not forgive betrayal. Lavina sensed someone beside her. When she opened her eyes, it was the Duke. She thought she must be dreaming. Wasn't he the one who never slept beside her? Thinking she was dreaming, she coquettishly asked him to soothe her to sleep. The Duke covered her eyes with his hand and told her to sleep. When she woke again the next morning, she was certain it had only been a long dream. 5 days had passed since they returned from the restaurant. During that time, the publishing house that had agreed to work with her had shut down. The landlord there even said he did not know William at all. As she had suspected, it had all been a scam from the start. Everything was a complete mess, and she did not know what to do. Feeling someone behind her, she assumed it was Melissa and asked her to comb her hair. But when she turned around, it was the Duke. He said she should not pin it up. Her hair suited her better left loose. Only then did she realize last night had not been a dream. The Duke really had been there. The atmosphere was just right, and she wanted to clear up the earlier misunderstanding. But just as she was about to speak, he interrupted her and said the past 3 years had been unfair to her, that he should not have left her nameless and without status. He put a ring on her finger and told her to call him by name. He said it was something he should have given her long ago. Moved to tears, Lavina threw herself into his arms. In truth, he had thought it over carefully and now understood how important she was to him. Lavina felt as though she were dreaming. They would return to the little island she used to love and spend the summer there. Once he finished his current business, he would join her. A boy by the sea addressed her as Madam, but Lavina told him to just call her by name. Tommy was the son of the island's governor. When he saw her there, he came right over. The island lay far from the capital and used to be barren, but after Klein developed business there, the island's economy had improved. That was why the people treated her kindly as well. Tommy thought she was the most beautiful person in the world, and she was kind even to a child like him. Sometimes she looked uneasy, but he had heard his father say that the Duke adored her very much. Still, she had already been waiting on this island for half a month, and she was truly anxious. The boy asked whether they would be married soon. His father had been busy everywhere, lately preparing for the wedding. Nervously, Lavina said that the Duke was arriving today. Could this be a surprise he had prepared for her? She felt deeply grateful. She hurried to the harbor to meet him. There, she unexpectedly saw Melissa too, who said his grace had arrived today. Yes, Lavina replied, but when she looked up, her expression froze. He had come with another woman. Lavina was stunned. Who was the woman beside him? Maybe just a wedding guest, or a distant relative. She called out to the Duke, but those fragile hopes shattered at once when he introduced the woman. This is my fiancée. Lavina felt the world spin, and the voices around her became distant. But the Duke's cold expression told her clearly that this was reality. People all around were whispering that the Duke had remained single only because he could not forget the fiancée who had died 3 years ago. Chloe let out a sigh and told the Duke not to blame her. Miss Barrow looked as though she had suffered quite a blow. The Duke ordered a maid to take Lavina away. After all the travel, they were both tired, and Miss Chloe's room had already been prepared. He apologized to Chloe, saying his mistress had been discourteous. She said it was fine, though inwardly she was already thinking about the marriage of convenience she had agreed to for the sake of business interests. When they had only corresponded by letter before, that was indeed all it was to her. But now she saw she might have to change her mind. It seemed his mistress would be easy to deal with. Before heading to the villa, she wanted to tour the island and asked the Duke to go with her. Lavina remained alone in her room. Soon the Duke came. She did not want him near her and said, "Didn't you make enough of a scene in broad daylight?" The Duke replied that he clothed her, fed her, and even the room she now lived in belonged to him. Now that she wanted to leave, he grabbed her hand. She truly was a pitiful mistress. He even said he would be married in half a month. But hadn't he practically proposed to her before? The Duke only sneered and said he had never promised her anything. It had only been a gift, the kind he gave often. Trembling, Lavina asked what he meant. He had seemed to like her so much. The Duke pushed her down and said, "Don't you love me? Then prove it." It was over quickly. Then he gave her a thick stack of money, saying it was a small token from him, and that if it was not enough, she could ask for more. Only then did Lavina, crying, ask whether he had ever loved her. For a moment, the Duke did not answer. Then loud knocking sounded from outside the door. Lavina opened the door and apologized, saying the child was asleep. The landlady shouted at her to pay the rent quickly. After taking the money, she warned that if the rent was late again, she would throw them out. At that moment, Lavina's son woke and asked what was wrong. She said nothing. The landlady just needed to speak to Mama about something. On that nightmarish night, she had once thought of ending her life, but some instinct made her give up the idea. She had not had her monthly bleeding in a long time. After much difficulty, she had found a tiny, shabby room to live in. Pregnant and heavy with child, she did the hardest work she had ever done in her life. This child looked so much like that lovable, hateful man. After seeing a doctor for the child's fever, she was relieved that he was gradually improving. Damien had been weak and sickly since birth. When she gave birth to him, it had been an emergency, and she had only found a midwife in the slums. So after he was born, he was constantly plagued by minor illnesses. The child was well behaved and wanted a toy too. But that was simply too hard for her. The money still was not enough, but if she worked a few more night shifts and took a few more jobs, she ought to manage. The doctor was kind and even gave the child candy. He said Damien was about the same age as his nephew, so it was nothing. Lavina made the child thank him too. Pregnant, she had wandered from place to place before finally settling here. The women in the village had, of course, said many things behind her back. The doctor felt sorry for what she had suffered. Just then, a nurse burst in to say a man had come looking for him, and he had to go out. That man came in soon after and restrained him. He asked only once whether he had seen a blonde, blue-eyed woman around 30. At once he knew the man meant Rebecca, but he said directly that he knew nothing. The man handed over a card and told him that if he saw her, he should contact Gino Gelida's through the hotel on the card. As long as he gave that name, the hotel owner would understand. Aunt Harriet is going to trouble people again. Harriet was the forewoman at the textile mill, the person Lavina had relied on for the past 5 years. She was also Lavina's benefactor. She had not only found her work, but even introduced her to a midwife. Still, Harriet loved gossip. She said Maywood had feelings for Lavina. Even if he was unmarried, Lavina already had a child. But Harriet said that was no problem. Hearing that now, Lavina only wanted to escape. She said she was hurt and accidentally knocked the newspaper off the table. On it was written, "Duke of Lupud, Mr. Dibbins, has officially divorced the Duchess and returned to Selwood this morning." The news shocked her. It was only when Harriet called her name that she came back to herself. She hurried away, thinking that they no longer had anything to do with each other. But just in case, she still decided to run. If she were to flee, the only valuable thing she had was that ring. When Anna came to see her, she found the house in a mess. The glittering ring caught Anna's eye. Wasn't Rebecca very poor? How could she have such an expensive ring? Then she pretended to knock over a cup. While Lavina went to clean it up, Anna quietly walked over and stole the ring. She did it without a sound, and Lavina noticed nothing. When Lavina had seen the report, her heart had nearly stopped. But life soon returned to calm. Because she had taken on multiple jobs, Damien often stayed at Harrian's house. At night, she would come to pick him up. Harrian speculated about what Damien's biological father might be like. Judging from the child's appearance, he must have been a great beauty. If he were around, Rebecca would not have to work so hard. While she was lost in thought, there came a knock at the door. Maywood had come looking for Rebecca. But he was too late. When Harrian asked what had happened, he told her everything. The man looking for Rebecca was someone who ostensibly ran a legal casino. But according to rumor, his real business was money lending and bootlegging, and he had ties to the Heiske family. Before leaving, he told Harrian that if she saw Rebecca, she should tell her to be careful. After that, he would come by for a house call. Unexpectedly, right after the doctor left, there was another knock at the door. She had already picked up a weapon. Anna had disappeared. Lavina heard that Anna had asked for next month's wages in advance, taken the money, and vanished. They said she had run off with a man. Speaking of which, this was from Dr. Fellamy. After returning home, Lavina thought he really was a good man. There was even a letter inside, warning that a man was looking for her and telling her to take care. Harrian was trembling all over. You were jealous? Was he here to collect Rebecca's debt? He took off his hat and said it was quite the opposite. He simply wanted to make a deal. After seeing the note, Lavina went to Harrian and asked whether anyone had come to threaten her into revealing where she was. But Harrian said nothing of the sort had happened. She even wanted to introduce Lavina to a new place to live. This village really was safer than where she lived now. If the rent was about the same, it was certainly tempting. But suddenly Lavina felt that something was wrong. She refused outright. Harrian said she would be moving soon. Without giving Harrian any chance to stop her, Lavina left directly. At that moment, a figure slowly appeared behind her. As for Rebecca's safety, he said he would guarantee it. He handed over a check and said the amount could be filled in however they wanted. It was payment for looking after his woman during this time. He only glanced at it before refusing. All he wanted was for Rebecca to live well, and he had promised her that. Klein walked over, somewhat displeased. He said he would handle it himself. Miss Barrow seemed to be avoiding him. But Damien was in poor health right now, and he needed a better environment to recover. And her eyes were clearly full of love. He just didn't know whether she had realized her own feelings yet. Inside the carriage, he had no intention of taking Rebecca away by force. He was only investigating who had sold that ring on the black market. It turned out to be a woman, and he guessed she had stolen it too. He had already arranged for someone to follow her. Harrian had taken care of Rebecca, but he was advised to treat Lavina better. He found that laughable. Just a few days ago, he had not even known Lavina's true identity. After Chloe signed the divorce papers, she disappeared. According to the informant, she seemed to have gone to the countryside to recuperate. That was good for him as well. Chloe had wanted to be a real married couple with him. The Duke had thought she was open-minded, and that what she said was only a joke. But she seemed determined to seduce him, constantly entering his room at the slightest excuse. And he didn't need an heir, so he had once considered accepting her. But the turmoil inside him was unbearable, as if he had been cursed. All he felt was revulsion. In the end, he was involved in a scandal with someone else. But in the end, he still failed. On the day of the divorce, she slit her wrists. Fortunately, she was saved in time. When his wife woke up, Klein gave her 2 documents. One was an application for admission to a psychiatric hospital. The other was the divorce agreement. If she didn't want a divorce, then she would have to enter the psychiatric hospital. In the end, Chloe tearfully asked if he had been just as cruel to her. It was a name he had not thought of in years. Chloe knew he still had not forgotten that woman. He would even call her name at night. But the Duke denied it outright. He even said she was pretending to be proper. He didn't believe it himself, but he felt as if he were cursed. He began thinking of that woman again. As the roar of the train sounded, he was really on his way to the capital. That fateful first meeting and how she had accidentally fallen. That destined tumble, the way they had fallen for each other at first sight, and that faintly blushing smile. All of it had moved him deeply. Later, he asked her to dinner. She loved Edelweiss because her hometown was full of it. That place was peaceful and beautiful. She had never left before. It was her first time going to the capital, and she had just turned 28. Their brief conversation ended, and when it was time to part, the reluctance on her face stayed with him. She really was charming, but she was still too young. Their connection should have ended there. Yet after he returned to the estate, her image kept surfacing in his mind, and his shallow conscience didn't last long before he began investigating that young lady. The investigation said she was a high-class courtesan who used her beauty to seduce noblemen, and that she was deeply in debt and being hounded by creditors. He felt he had been deceived, but she could still be useful to block the arranged marriage his mother had planned. Still, he wanted her to suffer a little first. At that moment, the butler suggested he go see Lavina. She didn't seem to be in very good shape. The butler had found a new lead. She was now living somewhere very remote. She had consulted a doctor named Feli, and she was working at a textile factory. She could have lived comfortably with that money, but instead she was living in such misery. At the thought of it, his heart ached sharply. Klein arrived at the hotel, but then news came that the woman who had sold the ring was already dead. The Duke immediately mounted his horse and sped off. He knew there were only two possibilities. Either the Queen had noticed something, or there was a traitor among them. Either way, Lavina would be in danger. On the heroine's side, she had just returned to her son. She solemnly told him that they were moving to a place far away. But at that moment, there was a knock at the door. She told her son to go back to his room and sleep first. Then she opened the door in fear. Standing outside was the very person she least wanted to see. The thing she feared had finally happened. He stepped inside, looked around her home, and said it was truly shabby. Then he said they should start over. He hadn't forgotten what she had done before, so this time he had come to take her back. But her child was still in the room. Lavina tried to drive him away. Just then, her son's voice came from inside, asking who it was. Hearing that voice, the Duke's eyes widened. He thought she had had a child with another man. The Duke looked at her in fury, convinced that this was why she had ended up like this, because she had a bastard child. Then he forcefully kissed her. Lavina slapped him across the face. His expression turned ugly. He said he was giving her only two choices now, either become his mistress again, or starve to death on the streets with her child. She couldn't understand why he had come back only to torment her. The Duke had originally only meant to give her some money and make her leave. At first, he had merely pitied her situation. After all, they had once been intimate. But now she had another man's child, and yet he still missed her terribly. So he felt he needed no reason at all. He simply ordered her to think it over and said he would come back at noon tomorrow. By then, he would also see the child. She truly had no way out. Her son was standing behind her. She told him that they might have to live with that man from now on. But Damien didn't want that, because that uncle had made mommy cry. Klein had once been her entire world. He doted on her, and she loved him deeply. But in the end, the one who kept her alive wasn't Klein. It was her child. The next day, she had no choice but to resign from her current job. She hadn't expected her co-workers to prepare flowers for her. Everyone was reluctant to see her go. After all, she was truly a good person. Lavina was deeply moved, and it was Harrion who had already heard that she was leaving. He called Lavina aside alone. In truth, he had already realized that Klein was the child's father. She had broken their agreement, and he wouldn't blame her for that. Damien needed a better environment to live in, and he could tell that the Duke loved her very much. Lavina knew he did not love her. Harrion probably didn't know what she had been through. Still, she was truly grateful for all the help they had given her during this time. She had one final request. Send this letter to Tillamy, the famous novelist, and tell him she missed him. Harrion offered her his blessing. She could no longer let herself be manipulated the way she had before. She had to protect Damien. If he learned that Damien was his son, and then one day grew tired of him again, Damien would be left alone in that vast, desolate castle. Before that could happen, she had to take him somewhere Klein could never find. The victim's upper lip was split, and there was blood on it. It seemed she had been forced to drink poison. At present, the prime suspect was the man living with her. That man would soon become a corpse as well. Go report to the judge and say an unidentified man left a female corpse at the inspection station and then disappeared. Someone was plotting against Lavina, and the method was extremely vicious. This likely wasn't the Queen's doing, too crude for her. The only one who would do something like this was him. Lord Gino has gone to fetch Miss Barrow. They should be arriving at the train station soon. The child was booked into a different compartment. The Duke didn't want to see him either. Even now, just thinking about what happened before gave him a headache. The Duke had come to pick her up, and by his order, everything except what she was wearing was to be thrown away. That really was the kind of man he was. Lavina wanted to see her child, but she was refused. The butler told her to trust him. The young master was the Duke's child, and therefore his master as well. 5 years ago, when she was still Klein's mistress, she was the only one who had treated him kindly. She was willing to trust the butler, but she had one thing to ask of him: not to tell the Duke Damien's identity. 5 years ago, he had thought she was nothing but one of the Duke's pretty dolls. He never expected to see such an expression on her face. He relented and said that the truth would come out sooner or later. He could let her see the young master once on the train. On the train, she finally saw Damien again. He was doing well. He had received many toys and was wearing new clothes. She really had put the child through a lot during this time. Her son was so good. The butler reminded her that she had to leave now. She had to go. In another compartment, the child didn't want her to be with that uncle. Afraid of angering Klein, she could only harden her heart and part with him. Her only wish now was for her child to be well. On the way to see the Duke, she felt as if she were walking to her execution. He sat in the room, leisurely reading a newspaper. When he saw her arrive, he merely told her to sit down. The fact that she hadn't brought that bastard with her pleased him. Lavina had a question for him, too. If she had no effect on him whatsoever, why had he come back for her and destroyed her life again? The Duke looked displeased. He had already told her she was trash he had thrown away. So naturally, it was his to pick back up. Lavina thought of her son. She shoved him away and demanded to know when he planned to abandon her again. The Duke silenced her with a kiss. Lavina wiped her mouth and said that if he didn't want to answer, then could she sleep now? She hadn't rested well last night. The Duke said it was up to her. And so she really did fall asleep. In her dream, someone was calling her. It was her uncle telling her that the capital was dangerous. She said she wasn't a child anymore. She wanted to go out into the world and fulfill her dreams. Her uncle knew he couldn't stop her, so he told her she could always come back. No matter what happened, he would always support her. Then the scene changed. She was being chased by others. After all she had gone through, she had always had the chance to ask her uncle for help, but she hadn't wanted him to see her like that. Her pride wouldn't allow it, but now she had to protect her child. She could only ask her uncle for help. When she opened her eyes again, she found the Duke sleeping beside her. 5 years ago, every time he held her, he would always leave afterward for one excuse or another. So why now? But it had no meaning anymore. At the Duke's estate, the headmaid said they must have had a tiring trip. Miss Barrow's room had already been prepared, the same one as before. But the Duke was taking her to the room next door, the one that had once belonged to the Duchess. Hearing that, Lavina felt uneasy. If she stayed next door to him, it would be harder to see her son. She wanted to stay in her old room, but one look from the Duke showed his displeasure. She had no right to refuse at all. Meanwhile, her uncle received a letter. It was a reminder from the publisher asking for his manuscript, so he refused it. But inside, he saw a letter from Harriet. In a few days, the Duke would be leaving the estate to deal with matters of taxes and city administration in his territory. And aside from her and the wet nurse, not many people had seen Damien yet. Lavina carefully wiped away his tears. The butler said that there had been no child between the Duke and the former Duchess. The young master might become the heir, but Lavina wondered what becoming the heir would really mean. Damien would spend his life in this closed estate, living the same kind of life the Duke had lived. The butler felt the child had the right to know his father. At the same time, the Duke also deserved to know that the child existed. But she would never let that happen. She would escape from here too. She had a new maid named Joan Judy. Lavina asked about Melissa, but Joan said she had resigned and returned to her hometown with a generous severance payment. Joan then led her to a room piled full of gifts. They were all presents for her. The Duke had publicly announced her return. The same nobles who had pointed fingers at her and called her shameless 5 years ago had now sent cards and gifts. Lavina told her to send everything back. Oh, and there was a letter too. The sender was Harriet Dickinson. She opened it and found that he was writing of how much he missed her. He had heard she was looking for a tutor for Damien, and the writer she liked, Laudley, happened to live nearby. He was currently looking for work. What did she think of hiring him as Damien's tutor? Laudley was another pen name of her uncle. Only she knew that. After Klein left, she had more chances to see Damien. In this place, Damien's status was awkward. He was the child her son by another man, while she was the Duke's mistress. He spent almost all his time in his room. He wanted to go to the lake in front of the castle. Poor child, so young, yet already aware of his own position. Lavina agreed. It should be fine. It was still dawn, and Damien was wearing a hat. Had this lake always been this beautiful? She had come here a few times when she was his mistress, but back then she had only found it dreary and damp. Being with her son made it different. She promised him that one day she would definitely take him away from here to a bigger lake where he could swim freely. When she got back, she would ask whether they could invite her uncle to be Damien's tutor. He didn't know that Laudley Diffins was her uncle's pen name. That part shouldn't be a problem. Early the next morning, the Duke asked where she had gone. Nervously, she said she had been feeling a bit stifled and had gone out for a walk. The Duke understood. So she had gone out alone without telling anyone. Looking at how thin she had become over the past 5 years, Klein felt as if there were a huge hole torn open inside him. He knew she had never taken that money, and whenever he thought about her casually seducing other men, it disgusted him. Yet the moment he saw Lavina Barrow again, what he felt wasn't anger at all, only attachment. He had thought that after abandoning her, he had forgotten her long ago. But that was not the truth. Now, there was only one thing he could not ignore. He decided to let the past stay in the past. She could go see that child, and if she wanted, she could even take him walking near the castle, as long as they didn't hover in front of him. If she wanted anything in the future, she could say it directly or have the maid pass the message on, because she needed it. She had never expected him to like this sort of thing. Once he was done with his work, they could go boating, and not long after he said that, he actually took her boating. They also had lunch together every day. Before, he had always held her however he pleased, saying it was the price of the favor he showed her. But now he barely touched her at all. Instead, he was so gentle with her. It seemed he had already given her plenty of freedom, but she wanted to see her child more often. In the hardest period of her life, it was her young child who stayed with her. After she survived those bitter years, the first time he called her mama and threw himself into her arms. Those were astonishing, unbelievable moments of happiness. That child was her everything. He was her hope for living. The Duke comforted her, telling her not to get upset. The Duke's embrace was warm, but she could not fall into this gentle trap again. After all, it was all fake. If she acted obedient and pliant, then perhaps she could make use of that again and see her child more often. The Duke said he would think about it. Come to think of it, he had been giving her gifts almost every day lately. At that moment, Melissa came in. She had been hired again and would now serve Miss Barrow together with Joan. Seeing a familiar face made Lavina very happy. She had heard Melissa went back to her hometown, so she hadn't expected her to return. Melissa had told Joan how much she missed her. Before, she had only been required to say one thing, that Miss Barrow was involved with a man named William. All this time, she had followed orders and played the role of an ignorant, loyal maid. She had been threatened. Her father had trouble walking, her mother was frail and ill, and she had several brothers who lazed around all day. Whenever guilt welled up in her heart, Melissa would comfort herself by thinking that Miss Barrow would surely live well. After all, she was the Duke's mistress. After returning home, she received a letter from someone named Joan. In the letter, Joan wrote that the woman had grown thin and haggard. 5 years ago, she had been famous for her breathtaking beauty. Now it was hard to believe. Melissa felt sorry for her lady. Even now, Miss Barrow still treated her with such kindness and gentleness. She must know everything. Just as Melissa was about to confess, Baron Sykes arrived, saying there was something regarding the trust funds he needed to discuss with her. He even glanced at her, so Melissa could only make an excuse and leave. While she was drowning in self-reproach, the Duke came to see her. On Lavina's side, things had already been taken care of. At that moment, Baron Sykes invited her out for a walk. This is a portrait of Lady Hayes. She was your Grace's great-aunt. The Dibbins family has always been known for its beauty. Among the direct bloodline, whether male or female, young or old, all are strikingly attractive. Lady Hayes died at about the same age you are now. A foreign Grand Duke fell in love with her at first sight, and the two married. But it was not a marriage she wanted. It was said she already had someone she loved. Less than a year after the wedding, she hanged herself. Only later did everyone discover that she had already been carrying her former lover's child when she married. The fate of everyone above was the same, ruined in childbirth or dead for love. Even the Grand Duke's middle name, Maximian, came from a name of his father's lover. Because of that, the Duke hated his own name. Anyone of the Duke's bloodline carries a kind of obsession. In their whole life, their heart can only hold one person. The Duke is the same. That pregnant fiancée who died. I sincerely hope both His Grace and Miss Barrow can be happy forever. But no relationship can be built on lies and concealment. I hope this time you will come to see certain truths clearly. After returning, she asked Melissa to bring her some sleeping medicine. She couldn't sleep. After taking the medicine, she would be able to fall asleep. She kept reminding herself of that. And yet, in some corner of her heart, she still seemed to be waiting for something. What she had wanted all along turned out to be the exact same face as the girl he had once deeply loved. When she woke and saw the Duke, she told him that while he was away, she had seriously thought about her own heart. During the past 5 years, she had truly missed him. She had missed him so much. Their relationship had once been as fragile as thin ice, but after that day, underwent a perfect transformation. Toward Lavina, who had finally softened and surrendered completely, Klein showed an unprecedented gentleness and tolerance. Look, Miss Barrow is here. She's still so beautiful. Her looks are just the same as 5 years ago. No, wait, doesn't she somehow look even prettier now? Joan felt that she and the Duke were growing closer and closer. If this continued, she might really become the Duchess. Joan had only been hired after Miss Barrow was driven out of the estate, so she knew nothing about their past. Lavina called Melissa to the terrace. She wanted some fresh air. You seem a little drunk. Did you drink too much? It was still a little chilly. Melissa wanted to get her a shawl. Lavina asked about what she had wanted to say that day, before Baron Sykes interrupted her. What was it? But Melissa said nothing. She only left, saying she would be right back. The Duke came over too, pressing close to her like a vampire. This was the perfect moment to make a request. She wanted to hire a tutor for Damien. Yes, it was a man. He was a writer she greatly admired, and she thought he would be suitable as a literature tutor. His name was Laudley. The man at the gaming table said excitedly, a royal flush. Well, another round? He had just cleaned another person out and was urging the Duke to play again. But the Duke saw through his trick and told him to hand over the cards hidden beneath the table mat first. The man offered to return the money, but the Duke refused. He thought it was a trivial sum. The man asked what was going on with him today, to sit there for so long. The Jurlitz Trading Company was booming, and the shareholders were making a fortune. He ought to be pleased, shouldn't he? The true mastermind behind Jurlitz. This little company had started in a shabby southern port, and now it had monopolized all land and sea routes throughout Selwood. Klein Dibbins. The fact that he had managed to establish himself in that rough southern port was no coincidence. Though remote, the southern harbor was dangerous by land and sea. But for organizations operating in the underworld, it was an important shortcut to foreign countries. While staying in his wife's homeland, Klein had secretly smuggled goods through there several times and even personally oversaw that war. This blood-stained man, who killed without blinking, now sat before him with the perfect image of a gentleman. And lately, he had indeed seemed much gentler than before. He asked him to investigate whether there had ever been a courtesan using that name. About 8 years ago, such a person might have appeared briefly. Maybe she was even still in business. But wasn't Lavina already his mistress? Why investigate a courtesan using that name? The Duke gave no explanation. He only said that if the matter was handled well, he would pay triple. After returning, he suddenly noticed how quiet it was and wondered if she was in the next room. When he went back, he discovered that she had once again fallen asleep in his room. He had clearly told her they would sleep in the same bed from now on. He had originally planned to leave, but then she had a nightmare and muttered, "Please, don't leave." The Duke wiped away her tears and thought that he would never make her cry again. The next day, the coachman asked if he was sure this was the place. He knew it was. That bastard had trapped his only niece. So this was her home. After he entered, a man named Gino, the Duke's accompanying secretary, came to lead him inside. This would be his room from now on. He could discuss the details with Miss Barrow. The contract period was half a year. Apart from lesson time, he was free to act as he pleased. But whatever he saw or heard here must never be spoken of outside. Laudley obediently said that he only had one life. Why would he take such a risk? As long as he could make money, everything was easy. The bathwater was already prepared, so he should wash up and rest first. He would be taken over later. Gino thought Laudley was far too shallow. A vulgar man like this was easy to read at a glance. Then he was brought to meet Miss Barrow. He had heard that she really loved reading his novels. The two began chatting pleasantly. Gino found it rather boring. They had actually gotten into a conversation. He still had work to do, so the two of them could talk at their leisure. Once Gino finally left, her uncle stepped forward and asked what was going on. She had actually become the Duke's mistress? Which parts were true? Lavina told Tilamy everything that had happened in the past. Then later she gave birth to Damien and was dragged back to this place again. Her uncle was heartbroken for her. She had suffered so much at such a young age. He felt Damien could never grow up happily in a place like this. She said that the island where he had abandoned her was a resort town in the south. Her uncle thought there might really be a way. A few days later, the Duke heard from Gino that the man was a bit odd and greedy. Lavina said that this tutor really was unusual but excellent. She was very satisfied, and Damien liked him too. She had spent some time at a salon with Countess Serena. The Countess said there would be a charity banquet at the end of the year. Lavina's standing in society had already risen to the point where she was fit to be compared with noble ladies. It was said that the Eve celebration banquet had left a very deep impression on everyone. She might be busy for a while because of it. The Duke was quite moved. Apparently she had done well. The butler was very pleased too. Even the key to the underground wine cellar could gradually be entrusted to her. That meant she would become the person in charge of all the household management in the castle. This had once been the thing she longed for most. Now it had become reality. But reality was only a poor imitation, not even as good as the dream. So Lavina refused. The Duke understood that she was pretending, but he was willing to keep playing along forever, whether she hated him or even wanted to kill him. Lavina only leaned closer and said she had a wish. Her uncle said he had a way for them to escape. She could suggest to the Duke that on that day, they go somewhere together. She said that when summer came, she wanted to go there again, the island where, years ago, he had abandoned her and married another woman. The wet nurse asked what the young master was doing. He said he was reading one of Teacher Diffins's books. It was an unpublished draft, and the protagonist in it had the same name as him. In the story, Damien and his mother lived together. Though their life was hard, they were happy. Then one day, a wicked dragon suddenly appeared and kidnapped his mother. To save her, brave Damien gathered his friends and went to seek help from a wizard. Laudley came over and cut him off. He had told the child it was an unpublished manuscript. He shouldn't let other people see it. What was Melissa doing here? Just because she was Miss Lavina's personal maid, did that mean she could wander around as she pleased? When Melissa apologized, he let it go and told her to be more careful next time, then leave. When no one else was around, Laudley told the child to call him uncle. But if he was Mommy's uncle, then shouldn't he be Damien's great uncle? His uncle told Damien that his mother was going to the capital today, and in 2 days he would follow too. But he must not forget, Damien had done nothing wrong. Had he finished the homework assigned a few days ago? Damien said that writing all of it might take the whole day. Lavina had dressed up especially today. Although the weather was getting warmer, the capital was still chilly at night. She had better take a shawl. Something seemed off with Melissa today. She looked listless. Melissa said that when she went to see Damien that morning, Mr. Diffins had scolded her. After hearing why, Lavina smiled and said, I see. Teacher Diffins can indeed be frightening at times. After Melissa left, Joan asked whether Miss had noticed that Melissa had been acting a little strange lately. She thought Melissa might be in love. And the other person was none other than Mr. Gino, the Duke's trusted aide. He lived next door to Melissa. Lately, every time the night grew quiet, she would disappear, so Joan had secretly followed her. As a result, she saw Melissa and Mr. Gino secretly meeting in the servants' dining hall. The atmosphere between them looked very warm. Relationships between servants were forbidden in the Duke's residence. This was love that crossed social boundaries. At that moment, the Duke arrived. It wasn't even time to leave yet. She was simply startled. The Duke felt she must be hiding something from him. Seeing the situation, Joan tactfully excused herself first. Lavina brought up what had happened before. The Duke told her to turn around and stand before the mirror. He closed his eyes and said that she should go ahead to the capital first. She could hold as many banquets as she wished, receive as many compliments as she liked. Then he fastened a necklace around her neck. He said that later they would go to the island together. She thought it was beautiful, but wasn't this necklace a treasure of the royal city? Back then, she had been simple, pure, and unworldly. She couldn't even tell whether certain things should or shouldn't be done. Back then, she hadn't known that a woman who could not stand before God openly, if she wore the highest treasure, would be condemned by everyone. The Duke kissed her and said, Lavina, nothing has changed, neither in the past nor now. Melissa knocked at the door, and the Duke withdrew and left. Melissa was still worried about where she was going, but Lavina said all that was in the past now. Earlier, Melissa had already confessed everything to the Duke. What she said before had all been lies. Miss Lavina had not cheated on him. Baron Sykes had ordered her to say those things. The Duke had thought, just as expected. Then he instructed her to keep behaving exactly as she had before. After that, he ordered her to report Miss Barrow's every move and never lie to him again. The newspapers were already reporting that Klein, Duke of Dibbins, had returned to the capital with his mistress. When the Duke of Dibbins married, he had used the excuse of an extended honeymoon and never set foot in the capital at all. And now, he had come back to the capital with the same mistress from 5 years ago. That alone was enough to create an uproar across the entire capital. It gave people goosebumps. This woman had been ruthlessly abandoned by the man she had lived with for 3 years. Then the moment the Duke reached out to her again, she shamelessly seized the chance at once. That was merely one person's opinion. Could she have secretly given birth to an illegitimate child? Someone said what Viscountess Asta was saying was impossible. The Duke had already brought that woman back 4 months ago. If the reasoning were correct, then with the Duke's temperament, he would have announced his heir immediately. And just then, the very subject of their gossip arrived. Lavina said that Viscountess Asta was truly brave. Her remarks had not only humiliated the Countess who invited her, but had also insulted the Duke of Dibbins. 5 years ago, even when humiliated before a crowd, she had not dared to talk back. But now, she could face them directly. She even calmly said in return that spreading rumors about royal bloodlines was absolutely unacceptable, and that if needed, they could speak directly with the Duke. The Duke was famous for being cold-blooded and merciless. If one offended such a man, in the end there was no choice but to apologize. The Countess stepped in to smooth things over. Viscountess Asta had indeed been at fault, and from now on, she would no longer be invited to these gatherings. In the social world of the capital, Countess Rachel held absolute influence. The Viscountess was directly escorted out. Countess Rachel also apologized to Lavina and invited her to sit. That night, the Duke was already very tired. He heard about what had happened at the banquet and said she had done very well, far better than before. At dawn, when she woke up, she found Gino in the room. He had come to ask Miss something. Did she know a woman named Cairo? That was a name she could never forget. The person who had lured her to the capital. His Grace wanted her to bring that person to this address. So she went to a place she had visited before. She remembered it was this street. Melissa was a little frightened, so Lavina told her to stay in the carriage. As expected, it was this place. And what exactly was Klein planning to do? When the door opened, she saw Cairo. She was inside, crying for help. The Duke said this was a gift for her. He handed her a gun and told her that if she hated Cairo, she should take revenge herself. But she refused. She could find other ways to make her suffer worse than death. Yet Lavina still refused. She did not want to become the same kind of person. Then she untied Cairo and smiled, saying she was safe now. And then she fainted. It seemed she was already exhausted. As for Cairo, Lavina wanted to spare her life, but he had no intention of letting her go. After all, he and Lavina had different ways of settling things. After they returned, he laid Lavina back on the bed. Baron Sykes. When he had lost his parents and been left all alone, Sykes had been the first loyal subject to extend a hand to him. Though he wanted to confront him and kill him immediately, reckless action might backfire. Even when he put the traitor right in front of the woman seeking revenge, she still chose to let him live. He had been testing her noble character, wanting her to sink to the same depths as himself. Yet even with the traitor before her eyes, she ultimately chose forgiveness. And that gave him a little hope. Speaking of the child, where is he now? Joanne said the young master fell asleep in the carriage. The wet nurse then took him to his room first. He went to check the child's age. It was clearly over 5 years old. It was possible that Lavina had given birth to his child. The child was right in front of him. It was his son, someone he had never thought of. Waking up in the morning, Damien was in a very good mood. And the wet nurse also said he could go out freely. For some unknown reason, the Duke had allowed him to come out and play happily. The wet nurse went to get some snacks. However, at this time, someone sat down next to him. There were clearly seats elsewhere. But this uncle in front of him insisted on sitting next to him. He was a handsome but annoying uncle. The uncle struck up a conversation and asked what he was looking at. He had no choice but to reply that he was looking at the duck family in the lake, because the mother and father ducks were always inseparable, and they also took good care of their children. His mother said his father was very far away, so he couldn't come to see them. He also said that even though they were far apart now, the moment his father saw him, he would definitely know they were family. Suddenly, there was a commotion ahead. Everyone shouted to run. A wolf that escaped from a nearby zoo was roaming in the park. The Duke was somewhat speechless. Why did this have to happen exactly when the child was there? And the wolf was charging right at them. The uncle protected him. The wet nurse also hurried over to ask if the young master was okay. He wanted to say that the uncle saved him, but in the blink of an eye, the uncle disappeared. After she woke up, she realized this was her room in the capital. She had actually fainted. Melissa brought water and said she had slept for a whole day, and the young master had also come over. She missed her son so much. Her son told her what he had just encountered. This really worried her. Furthermore, her son wanted to go to that park again. He wanted to see that uncle one more time. The next day, although Damien waited in the park for quite a while, the uncle he was looking for didn't show up. Melissa said that the man was bitten deeply and she could go ask around about him. Lavina agreed. Speaking of which, the newspapers were now reporting that the royal hunting grounds would be open to the public for a week. Hearing there were small animals inside, Damien also wanted to go. Lavina told the child to be good, and she would think about it. At this moment, Melissa suddenly noticed someone approaching from afar. From a voice, Lavina recognized it was Countess Rachel. She had no choice but to get out of the carriage to greet her. Countess Rachel looked confused when she saw her. The weather was fine today, yet Lavina had covered her face. She had to explain that she didn't want to attract attention. However, the child suddenly sneezed inside the carriage. This immediately caught the Countess's attention, but Lavina didn't want anyone else to see. Damien understood Lavina's intention. The Countess didn't press further, just wanted to invite her to have a chat. It seemed important. Lavina pondered for a moment and agreed. Arriving inside the tea house, the Countess got straight to the point. She said Lavina was in grave danger. Yesterday, the Queen invited the daughter of Marquis Tyrant to the royal castle and even had them enter through the back door. The Queen already planned to make Lady Tyrant the next mistress of the Duke's household. Lavina was very surprised upon hearing this. The Duke had been very unusual the past few days. He wasn't home during this period and even agreed to let her and the young master be together. Seeing her like this, what else could the Countess not understand? But noble marriage contracts were out of one's control. As long as the Duke cared for her, it didn't matter even if she was just a mistress. Conversely, even if one became the Duchess, without the husband's favor, it would mean nothing. Last time at the banquet, the Countess drove away Viscountess Estelle. Combining that with what she was saying now, it was obvious she was on her side. Now Lavina only cared about one thing. Did that lady have blonde hair and blue eyes? The Countess thought for a moment and said no. That lady had reddish-brown hair. She asked this because, to the Duke, taking a wife was merely a means to an end. And for the woman he loved, perhaps a replacement was all he needed. After returning, Lavina told her uncle about this, saying they no longer needed to run away. His Grace's engagement was already settled. She would be abandoned sooner or later. By then, as long as the child lived well, it would be enough. The Duke perhaps just treated her as a toy. Thinking of this, Lavina felt so sad that she wanted to cry. However, her uncle didn't think so. During this time, he observed the Duke's attitude toward Lavina and found that the Duke's eyes were full of obsession when looking at her. And it was also obvious that Lavina was full of love for the Duke. But he didn't point this out. A period of time passed like this. The Duke suddenly returned one night. She politely said a few words of concern. The Duke was very cold to her, and even met her words of concern with smoking and cynical mockery. Lavina stayed silent for a while and stated that she would sleep next door tonight. The Duke, however, asked her a question. During the past 5 years she had been gone, how had she really lived? After finding her, the Duke had never asked such a question. She still answered truthfully that although those days were very hard, having the child by her side made her feel very happy. The Duke also asked about things after she gave birth. This made Lavina very angry. Why did the Duke ask about these things? Did knowing she lived poorly all those years make him happy? However, at this moment, the Duke suddenly said that he planned to get a dog. When hunting season arrived, he would take her and the child along. Lavina was a bit surprised. The Duke had never wanted to see the child. Why did he suddenly change his attitude? Facing her inquiry, the Duke said in a weird, sarcastic tone, "Then let the child not appear in front of me. Is that okay?" Soon it was the next day. A puppy was brought to the Duke's mansion. The merchant introduced the dog's personality and traits. The Duke showed a severe lack of interest in animals. Lavina also didn't show much fondness for it. Instead, Damien super liked it. The shop owner quickly stepped forward to say that this puppy was a mixed breed, not very smart, and had been unsold for a long time. Seeing that Damien liked it, the Duke said, "That puppy it is." Then, he took Lavina's hand to go somewhere. The strange looks from around them almost drowned her. This greatly challenged her self-esteem, so she wanted the Duke to let go of her hand. But the Duke thought she was just shy. Soon they arrived at a clothing boutique. The attendant came forward to greet them, enthusiastically ushering her inside. The Duke picked out clothing styles outside. She soon came out wearing a dress. The Duke said it suited her very well. The shop clerks watched the gossip from the side. After that, they went to a jewelry store and a boutique. They shopped until nightfall. Lavina didn't understand why the Duke was doing this at all. The Duke didn't want to explain his behavior. Lavina reminded him that this would have a bad impact on him. After all, His Grace was about to get married. The Duke looked somewhat surprised. She had already heard about Her Majesty choosing a marriage for him. The Duke's expression turned fierce. He asked where she heard these things. He too wanted to know who his wife was. Seeing the Duke's expression, Lavina didn't know what she had said wrong. The Duke looked very angry, asking if she hoped for things to be this way. Although she wanted to escape the Duke's clutches, she also didn't want His Grace to be with another person. Her perception had been destroyed. Why was he able to naturally marry someone else? But she still said that with her current status, she was completely unworthy of saying anything. Before she could finish, the Duke stepped forward and silenced her words with a kiss. The Duke's contempt broke her heart. Since His Grace wanted to act, Lavina could play along to the end, even though she could no longer tell if he truly loved her or was just pretending. The next day, the Countess walked beside her, talking about the rumors outside. They all said that the Duke and she were deeply in love, and that the Duke doted on her more and more. This was something the Countess hadn't expected. Lavina could never figure out why the Countess was helping her. After all, Lady Tyrant had more of an advantage. The Countess explained that 5 years ago, she indeed wasn't worth paying attention to. Although she wore gorgeous clothes, she looked foolish. But when she returned this time, she had changed her previous cowardice. The way she quietly struck back at Viscountess Estelle was very interesting. The Countess wanted to know the reason she had changed like this. Actually, it was very simple. It was because of her child, but she wouldn't tell the Countess the truth. The two originally wanted to have a cup of tea together. However, a lady walked by and knocked over her umbrella. Turning her head to look, it turned out to be Viscountess Estelle, who even demanded an apology from her. Following behind was another lady, Lady Tyrant. Viscountess Estelle clearly had ill intentions, and Lady Tyrant even secretly mocked her for being a whore. The Countess stepped forward to stand up for her. With her status presented there, this prevented Lady Tyrant from being too presumptuous. Sure enough, she put away her harsh words and smiled, saying it was all right. She also told Viscountess Estelle to pick up the umbrella. That cold look left Viscountess Estelle not daring to say anything. After that, the two left with a smile. Watching them walk away, the Countess told Lavina not to be nervous. Upon learning the Countess's identity, Lady Tyrant became respectful. Moreover, she would even let her own people do things that damaged their prestige. This kind of person could never become a fearsome enemy. However, at this moment, the butler ran over. He urgently needed to see Lavina. It turned out the young master was walking the dog in the morning, but the puppy ran off. The young master chased it all the way to a remote area. It was said he encountered a vagrant there. Fortunately, the young master only had scrapes on his face. The vagrant had already been detained. Hearing her child was in danger, Lavina lost control a bit, but she also knew she couldn't blame the discipline. Moreover, the butler said the young master was already resting. She could only go visit him tomorrow. At night, the uncle sat in front of Damien. He thought he was dreaming. The Duke told him to go to sleep quickly, but Damien didn't want to. He was afraid the uncle would leave after he fell asleep. The Duke didn't confess his identity, only saying he also had a son around his age. Damien felt the adult in front of him was really strange. He felt the person in front of him wasn't an adult, but a little boy covered in scars. He suspected the adult in front of him was a ghost, who had an obsession in this world, so he kept wandering the mortal realm. Damien was also willing to help the uncle find his son. The Duke smiled and didn't expose him, saying he was willing to be his friend. However, Damien could clearly feel that the uncle in front of him looked very much like him. The Duke told the child to rest quickly and that their meeting couldn't be told to his mother. Damien agreed, but he still didn't want the uncle to leave right now. But his eyes were already fighting to stay open. After the Duke came out, the butler came to report. That vagrant specifically came to assassinate the young master. It was just that after being discovered, he took poison and committed suicide. And the poison the vagrant took was the same one used to poison Anna. The zoo incident was also highly suspicious. Someone likely let the wolf out intentionally. This matter was obviously done by the same person. It couldn't be the queen, because she had no reason to do such a thing on her own land. The ex-wife, who was exiled, also lacked the ability to make waves. Then the only remaining suspect. The Duke suspected Benedict. He was once his loyal servant, but couldn't accept his master being with a mistress. Regardless, if he had crossed the line, he wouldn't let him off easily. Time flew by, and soon the hunting season arrived. Lavina was a bit worried about her child. Sitting in the carriage, she felt somewhat apprehensive. She heard that Lady Tyrant would also participate in the hunt. The Duke told her not to mind it, saying he wasn't interested in other women. Perhaps she would have believed it 5 years ago, but now she no longer believed a word the Duke said. They had to act like playing roles, a hypocritical mistress and a deeply infatuated, foolish man. Lavina couldn't help but ask, if she died in the end like the vicious mistress in the novel, would he shed tears for her? However, the Duke's reply was very realistic. He wouldn't do that. This year's hunting season was grander in scale than ever before. At the same time, this was also a social venue for ladies. Lavina was already quite adept at attending such occasions. The Countess felt a bit regretful that Her Majesty the Queen didn't participate this time. Just as everyone started discussing this, Lady Tyrant also came over, wanting to join their conversation. She apologized to Lavina, saying yesterday was entirely her fault. Lavina couldn't quite fathom Miss Tyrant's intentions. Since she was putting on an act, Lavina would play along to the very end. Miss Tyrant didn't expect to encounter a master. After saying what she wanted to say, she left. Lavina had successfully handled the matter. At the end of the banquet, the Countess asked Lavina to stay behind privately, telling her not to let her guard down. Just as she brought up the Duke, Lavina made an excuse that she was tired and wanted to go back and rest. Right after Lavina left, the Duke came to speak a few words with the Countess. Returning that night, Melissa was already thinking about how to dress up for tomorrow, because on the last day of the banquet, there would be a vote to elect the queen of the festival. After becoming the queen, one could do anything and could also dance with a gentleman of their choice. She suddenly realized that the reason Miss Tyrant acted like that was probably to canvass for votes for tomorrow. Lavina felt it was nothing to be afraid of. If Miss Tyrant became the queen, the worst she could do was invite his grace for a dance. Melissa felt very helpless. Her lady wasn't jealous at all. Just as Melissa said, she was someone without desires, who saw through worldly matters. In truth, she simply understood that all of this was meaningless. Saying so, she dismissed the maid and went to change her clothes herself. However, at this moment, the Duke unexpectedly appeared behind her and helped zip up her dress. For this hunt, the Duke originally planned to hunt foxes, but the forest ranger said foxes were going extinct, so he could no longer hunt them. The Duke also asked Lavina how she was doing, noting that Tyrant could no longer bother her. The Duke couldn't help but laugh out loud. If it were the Lavina of the past, she would just obediently let herself be bullied. She indeed would have done so before, but the ending was never good. Saying so, she wanted to rest. The Duke said with a wronged expression that recently she hadn't said those words, the words saying she loved him. Moreover, Lavina's gaze had changed. Saying this, he realized he had said too much and changed the subject. They would head back the morning after next. He also mentioned he would want to see the child. Lavina was a bit panicked. Recently, the Duke had started taking an interest in the child. Perhaps when that man found out the child was his, he would change his attitude toward the boy. But thinking about it again, she rejected her own idea, because she felt the Duke wouldn't change so easily. When night fell, the Countess came looking for her. After this evening's banquet ended, the queen election would begin. The rules for this election had changed slightly. If the accompanying gentleman caught the most foxes, she would get 3 votes. However, the one who caught the most foxes this year was the Duke of Devonshire, and since the queen didn't attend, she might be the star of tonight. The Countess wanted Lavina to win this competition because Tyrant liked the Duke. But the Duke in the distance had absolutely no interest in the girl in front of him. Instead, he kept looking at Lavina from afar. This made her feel very strange. However, at this moment, the waiter next to her accidentally broke a wine glass, and the wine spilled on her dress. The Duke immediately rushed to Lavina's side. Going to the lounge, the Duke asked where the necklace he gave her last time was. Lavina took it out. It was a very beautiful necklace, but it didn't suit her. The Duke told her to put it on and drape this shawl over her. The necklace was put on her by the Duke himself, but Lavina didn't like it. To her, this necklace was a shackle of imprisonment. Soon, she returned to the banquet. The Countess told her to come over quickly. Now her votes were far ahead of everyone else. She was destined to be tonight's queen. However, when reading out the final results, Her Majesty the Queen's maid arrived, casting a vote on behalf of the Queen, and she cast a vote for Miss Tyrant. She happily went up to the stage. With a clear goal, she designated Klein as her male companion. Lavina was a bit disappointed. However, the Duke took her hand and rejected Miss Tardin. He publicly announced that Lavina was his fiancée. Everyone present was stunned. Miss Tardin was the first to protest, saying this violated propriety. The Countess stepped forward to explain. The so-called engagement means the woman receives an engagement gift given by the man's mother and wears it. And the necklace she was wearing was the former Duchess's possession. Although they hadn't formally held an engagement ceremony, their hearts were already connected. Therefore, Miss Tardin had no chance. The Duke looked at Lavina and smiled, saying wasn't this what she wanted? She was going to become the Duchess. But Lavina wasn't very happy. Perhaps she had extravagantly hoped for this in the past. So now she wanted to say a few words. She stepped to the front and said to everyone that although their relationship was indeed no different from an engagement, they hadn't held a ceremony yet. She planned to hold the engagement ceremony 3 months later on Lupus Island. Everyone present applauded and congratulated the couple. Only Miss Tardin looked extremely unpleasant. The banquet ended. Lavina went back with the Duke. She was super disgusted by the Duke acting on his own. The Duke didn't feel he did anything wrong. After all, this was what Lavina had always wanted before. At first, Lavina was still a bit curious about why the Duke wanted to propose to her. It turned out the Duke had resolved the misunderstanding he had about her from many years ago. At that time, someone framed her for having an affair with another man. Lavina was shocked after hearing this. She didn't even know why such a misunderstanding occurred. At the time, she obviously just wanted to publish her work, which was why she arranged to meet the boss. And the reason she didn't tell the Duke at the time was mainly because he was very terrifying back then. The Duke mentioned that the first person to report her was Gertrude. He claimed he orchestrated it all by himself, and after leaving the mansion, he was murdered. The woman who stole Lavina's ring before was also murdered in the same way. The killer had been investigating her whereabouts. That person was Benedict. He couldn't stand Lavina, so he adopted a method to kill her off completely. Lavina still couldn't quite believe it. The Duke whispered that the man had fled abroad, but he would definitely catch him and bring him back. He also apologized to Lavina, but the damage the Duke had caused her was truly too painful. She could not choose to forgive him. Moreover, he didn't even show a remorseful look. This made her feel so tired. She didn't want to care about what happened after. And for this engagement, she deliberately chose that island full of painful memories because her uncle once said that 3 months later on Lupus Island, she would fake her death there. Years ago, there was a document about Lupus Island. It said a boy who was swept away by the waves was found in a cave at the front of the island. Her uncle specifically went to investigate and found it was caused by the influence of ocean currents. Her uncle proposed she could take a risk. When the time comes, they would deliberately create an accident, making everyone believe they were dead and then escape. Upon hearing this, Lavina felt it was very dangerous, and the child was still young. Her uncle told her not to worry about the child's safety. He would be responsible. Although this method was risky, it would allow her to escape Klein's side, which was the best outcome for her. This was the only chance to break free from the Duke's control. Actually, she could bear that kind of life, but the child was innocent. For her child's future, she decided to take the risk. The hunting season soon ended. They returned by carriage. Lavina hadn't seen her son for a long time. Her uncle took good care of him. The child had a talent for writing since a young age, and he found the articles his niece had written. They were also quite good. They could be organized and published. But Lavina wasn't confident yet. Although this novel was the root cause of her being misunderstood, she had never given up writing over the past 5 years. Then her uncle sent the child away and asked Lavina about the engagement. She wanted to schedule it in the summer to let more people witness her death. This engagement banquet would become her rebirth banquet. Outside, Damien was playing with a ball. The wet nurse was called away for a moment to attend to something, leaving only Damien and the puppy playing. The Duke, however, walked out from the bushes, holding the ball Damien had thrown. Seeing an acquaintance, Damien was very happy. He didn't even wonder why the uncle would appear here, but instead invited him to play together. He had no friends here and played by himself every day. Hearing this, the Duke felt a pang of heartache. However, the child quickly cheered up and wanted to teach the uncle how to kick the ball. The Duke refused. The child thought the uncle didn't know how. He used what his mother told him to comfort the uncle, saying there are no perfect people in this world. Everyone has their own shining points. The child smiled craftily and said a lot more, but he wanted the uncle to play ball with him before continuing. The Duke agreed and directly kicked the ball into the sky. Damien was stunned in place. Meanwhile, Lavina was confirming the banquet guest list. Her polite and modest demeanor made the butler feel a bit guilty. To be honest, the Duke was not a good marriage partner. He was emotionally cold, acting decisively and without human empathy. The Duke's father died unexpectedly very early on, and his mother went to her maiden home and never returned. His Grace grew up all alone, facing immense pressure and external doubts. Situations involving assassinations were not rare. It was in such an environment that His Grace lacked the ability to perceive love. Even now, the butler still remembered what the Duke looked like as a child, and also felt regretful. But her appearance made the butler see hope. But Lavina absolutely didn't believe the Duke loved her. She even felt like vomiting upon hearing the butler say these things. However, at this moment, a guard called her to the garden. She was confused. The aide beside her explained that starting from today, a portrait needed to be painted for the lady to be included among the family member portraits. Thinking of this, she wanted to vomit. Maybe she was feeling a bit unwell. Regardless, she just wanted to finish the portrait painting quickly. It took a long time, but in the end, only the face was left unpainted. Because she didn't show the smile the Duke wanted, the painter never dared to start on it. The engagement banquet was about to begin. The Duke ordered the painter to go to the island with them to capture Lavina's expression. As for Benedict, the aide had already found him, but he had become a corpse, barely recognizable by appearance. The Duke wanted to see it with his own eyes before disposing of the body. Then the Duke asked about Lavina's condition and handled the preparations for the engagement banquet. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. The Duke clearly remembered the radiance in Lavina's eyes when she talked about things she liked. The smile he wanted was the smile Lavina revealed from the bottom of her heart. The Duke arrived at the site where the body was kept. The person lying in front of him had once treated him very well, like a father. And now, seeing that person's dead state, he didn't even know what his feelings were. Late at night, in the Duke's mansion, Klein walked into Lavina's room. The woman on the bed had already fallen into a deep sleep. Not knowing what she was dreaming about, her brows were slightly furrowed. Benedict was dead, but it couldn't solve the problems between them. In her dream, Lavina shed tears and whispered apologies to her son, saying she was a useless mother. Klein felt a stinging pain in his heart. When he saw Benedict's corpse earlier, he felt no emotional ripples. It was as if even if his biological father were in front of him, he would remain indifferent. Such an emotionally cold person, yet he felt differently towards Lavina. Only when facing her could Klein feel like a human being, capable of feeling sadness, anger, and joy. Even if his existence was a living hell for this woman, Klein would absolutely never let go. The sailboat sailed on the sea. Damien felt very refreshed facing the sea breeze. His mother was beside him, worrying if he would feel unwell. Damien only cared if there were peers on the island, so they could play together. The tutor walked over, saying it was time for class, and took the young master away. The tutor said goodbye to the lady meaningfully. Lavina looked calmly at the sea surface. When she left this island, she only hoped to disappear from this world, like the mermaid in the fairy tale. At this moment, she felt a weight on her shoulders. The Duke stood behind Lavina, draping a coat over her, and asked what she was pondering. Why wasn't she wearing the necklace? Lavina just said the necklace was too heavy, and it wouldn't be good if it fell off on the ship. The Duke suddenly leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Benedict is dead, and so is Baron Sykes." The people who harmed her 5 years ago had all disappeared. Following what Lavina had said before, they were going to that island again to rediscover their memories, going back to that day 5 years ago. But she remembered that on that day, the Duke had brought another woman to the island. This was something Lavina would never forget. So she stood up, saying she was feeling a bit seasick, and went down first. Her cold and distant demeanor made the Duke feel very sad. The voyage to the island was smooth sailing. The sky was clear all the way, and the sea was surprisingly calm. As if preparing for an impending typhoon, she had returned once again. This villa was completely different from 5 years ago. An acquaintance, Tommy, walked out from inside. Having not seen him for a while, Tommy had grown taller. It was much easier to get things done with acquaintances. Lavina wanted to ask the child to help run errands. The butler looked hesitant. Master Tommy was the son of the local regent. This wasn't very appropriate. However, Tommy said he was willing. Since Tommy himself agreed, the Duke, standing nearby, told him to go ahead. Because the engagement ceremony was held here, the church had also been renovated. Joan saw this, harboring ill intentions, and quietly badmouthed the lady. However, Melissa beside her didn't go along with her upon hearing this. Instead, she reprimanded Joanne. Tommy ran over at this moment, saying that as per her instructions, he had passed the letter to the tutor. Lavina called the maids to head back to the villa together. Everything for the wedding was handled single-handedly by Melissa. 5 years ago, Lavina was full of expectations here. But now things had changed. When asked what her feelings were now, she casually replied that she felt relieved. Then, she turned her head and told Joanne to marry in her place. She was going to run away. As soon as she said this, the few people were rendered speechless. The atmosphere immediately became tense. Lavina chuckled aloud, smiling and saying it was a joke. But this joke was not funny at all to the three of them. Joanne changed the topic, saying the Countess was scheduled to arrive today, and she might already be at the port. Countess Reich had arrived at the port. Lavina personally greeted her. Countess Reich got in the carriage, smiling in anticipation of her portrait, imagining how beautiful it would be. Lavina said she hadn't found a suitable expression, so the painting wasn't finished yet. Soon they arrived at the villa. 5 years ago, the wedding of Klein and the former Duchess was like a puppet show. The bride was stunningly beautiful, and the groom was flawless. But the Duke of Dibbins was completely expressionless, looking daunting to anyone who saw him. No one knew what this engagement at the Duke's mansion would be like. At this time, Klein came out to greet them. The two exchanged a few pleasantries, and Countess Reich went inside to rest. As soon as she left, the Duke swept Lavina into his arms, saying he wanted to show her something. They rode to the seaside. A meal was laid out on the beach. The Duke had specially prepared it upon hearing that her appetite had been poor recently. 8 years ago, she had mentioned on the train that she hoped one day to eat her favorite foods by the sea. She never expected the Duke to still remember. At that time, Lavina had just experienced her first awakenings of love, and she chatted joyfully with Klein, so she told him everything she wanted to say. Oysters were also prepared on the dining table. This was what she had craved most when she was pregnant. Unknowingly, she began talking about the child. The Duke didn't show any aversion. Instead, he wanted to hear her say more. Lavina recalled the cheese, fried eggs, or wet nurse used to make when she was little. That taste was still hard for her to replicate now. The Duke listened sincerely, wanting to understand her better. Lavina's heart sank a bit. She couldn't say everything. What if Klein got angry? So she talked about her childhood matters instead. They chatted like this until dusk fell in the blink of an eye. Lavina opened her relaxed, sleepy eyes, only to find herself in the Duke's arms. They had already left. Delicious food, beautiful scenery. The things that happened today felt like a dream. After staying silent for a while, she opened her eyes. Before the engagement, she wanted to spend some time alone with her son, going for a boat ride on the sea. The Duke inexplicably felt uneasy. Knowing that she was with the tutor and there was someone looking after them, he barely agreed. Tomorrow was the engagement ceremony. Lavina deliberately dressed up nicely. Today, she planned to go boating and invited Countess Reich to join her. The time was set for 9 p.m. It was said that the sea, illuminated by moonlight, was extraordinarily beautiful. The Countess agreed and also wanted to tell her one thing about the Duke's pregnant former fiancée, why she died in an accident. 8 years ago, there was a rumor that the fiancée of the Duke of Dibbins fell from a horse and tragically lost her life. Although that accident was said to be purely accidental, it was full of suspicious points. Before the accident occurred, the ships operated by the fiancé's family encountered a shipwreck, and from then on, the family went into complete decline. All of this was too coincidental. Someone faked the accident and killed her. The Duke's marriage wasn't just a simple alliance of noble families. It involved the interests of the royal family. Therefore, the mastermind behind the scenes was Her Majesty the Queen. There were rumors going around that this fiancé's family wanted to use the Duke to grasp power sufficient to shake the royal family. So, before things could grow serious, the royal family would surely crush the seedlings of treason in the cradle. That was Her Majesty the Queen's way. After that, Her Majesty continued selecting the Duke's next bride, and he completely failed to meet Her Majesty's criteria. Zeno walked over from the side and added that the reason Her Majesty did not make a move was because the Duke intervened. 5 years ago, Miss Lavina was surrounded by threats. The greatest of them, of course, was Her Majesty the Queen. At that time, the Duke agreed to that marriage and tacitly accepted a bargain. Not only did that keep Lavina safe, it also made the Queen stop watching the ducal house so closely. When you think about it that way, the Duke is full of contradictions. To keep the woman he loved by his side, he married another woman. During the 5 years he was away, the Duke's power grew. At last, he had the strength to face Her Majesty directly. Countess Lakei found that absurd. He wasn't building power for himself. At the wedding 5 years ago, the Duke didn't respect Miss Bellow's wishes at all. The two began arguing over it. Zeno had nothing to say and turned to Lavina. The Duke asked that she come to his carriage. They arrived at a mansion. This was the mausoleum of the Duke of Dibbens's family. Only she was allowed inside. When she went in, the Duke was standing there. This is Heiss, the elder sister of the Duke 2 generations ago, which made her the Duke's grandaunt. Miss Heiss. Lavina had seen her portrait in the corridor at Vri. But this shrine was empty because after she married off to a foreign land, she hanged herself. She became the family's disgrace and was ultimately erased from the family register. Whether it was her portrait or this empty grave, both were only arranged after the previous Duke's death. When the Duke spoke of his family, it was as if he were speaking of strangers. He even said that someone like Heiss, who had been blinded by emotion, could not wash away her disgrace even in death. And the reason he was standing here now was because not long ago, Klein had thought that if anything happened to Lavina, he would not be saddened by it. But there was one thing he could promise. After they died, they would be buried together. No matter how many women Klein married afterward, only Lavina would be his lawful wife. With a sharp smack, Lavina slapped the Duke's hand away. He knew full well that what happened 5 years ago had been a misunderstanding, yet he still didn't even offer an apology. The Duke fell silent and looked at her, never apologizing. Instead, he said he would compensate her with wealth and honor or a great name. In the Duke's eyes, all of that was better than an apology. His words made her heart sink. Their ways of thinking, their values, and their moral standards were completely different. In the end, she said nothing and simply turned to leave. The Duke sensed Lavina's rejection. He didn't understand why the woman who had once loved him deeply had changed. But once tomorrow passed, he would be able to keep this woman in the palm of his hand. In the carriage, the two sat in silence. Soon they reached the ducal residence. Lavina got down and said she wouldn't be eating dinner. Joan came hurrying over, saying she had been looking for Miss Lavina. The Duke's silence made Joan sense that something was wrong. She asked what had happened, but Lavina did not want to say much. She told Joan to bring the painter to the seaside at 9 tonight. She believed the painter would witness a scene he would never forget for the rest of his life. Soon night fell. Her uncle had planned everything. When the time came, he would tie Damien up in advance. Lavina prepared to get away. Damien knew that after leaving, he might never see Ghost Uncle again. He made a promise with his mother that after they left, they would go see that lake again. At that moment, her uncle suddenly grew worried. If something changed this time, he feared something might happen to his niece and Damien. This was Lavina's only chance to escape. She held her uncle's hand. No matter what, they had to try. Wealth and reputation did not mean happiness. She was certain that even if the Duke found out Damien was his son, he would not care that much. Suddenly, her uncle heard a sound at the door. When he opened it, it was Melissa. She looked terrified. By accident, she had overheard that Madame was planning to run away. Her uncle became anxious. Melissa would tell the Duke. The woman before him was highly suspicious. She had once been Lavina's only maid, and after his niece disappeared, she returned to her hometown. But now she was back working here again. 5 years ago, someone must have been reporting Lavina's every move to that Baron's sex. Melissa must have been on Sex's side before. The reason the Duke had kept her must have been to monitor his niece. Hearing this, Melissa burst into tears and begged Miss Lavina for forgiveness. Though Lavina was shocked and disappointed, she still forgave her. Melissa was not a bad girl, but forgiving her was one thing. Disliking Melissa was another. A storm was coming. Tomorrow morning, everything would certainly be in chaos. As long as they boarded the fishing boat before dawn, they could escape the Duke's notice and leave this place. As for Melissa, whether she spoke or not no longer mattered. By the window stood the Duke. That affectionate gaze was something she had once longed for. But now, she had nothing left to miss. Once aboard the boat, Countess Lakei said in a low voice that the painter was already waiting on shore. As the boat left the small island, the breeze stirred Lavina's hair. The painter felt that something about the atmosphere was off. It would be best to tell the servants and have Miss Lavina come back at once. Then he saw Lavina reveal a genuine smile. He hurried to get his canvas. Rain began falling over the sea. Tommy knocked on the Duke's door with a letter in hand. Miss Lavina had instructed him that when the 9:30 bell rang, he was to deliver this to the Duke. The Duke opened the door and asked what it was. Just as he was about to unfold the note, a maid came running over in a panic. She said something had happened to Miss Lavina. The boat she was on had been swept away by the storm. Countess Lakei was weeping beside her. She said she saw with her own eyes the waves swallow the boat whole. The Duke's eyes went slightly dry as another servant came running over. He said the search party at the shore had found Miss Lavina's boat. After an unrelenting search, all they had managed to recover were the shattered wreckage of the vessel. The Duke's engagement ceremony was canceled because of the tragic accident. The guests, filled with sorrow, each departed. In the end, Lavina and Damien were never found. Time flew by in the blink of an eye. 2 seasons passed. The entire island was peaceful, as if such a furious storm had never happened. The Duke still had not found Lavina's body. Everything pent up inside him had only grown heavier. The Duke did not believe that woman was dead. The note she left behind asked the Duke what point in time he wished to return to. Zeno directed the servants to carry something in. Miss Lavina's portrait had just been completed yesterday. The painter felt that although Miss Lavina was peerlessly beautiful, something was missing. She looked like a carefully dressed doll. After agonizing over it for a long time, he finally understood. The person in the painting needed life. The day he saw Miss Lavina smile, she was like a goddess of life, burning herself so that all things might awaken and be reborn. According to the holy scriptures of Clotia, the goddess Hernia, who governs life, symbolizes eternal purity and nobility, bearing sacrifice and the cycle of life. She represents all living things and also a new beginning. Damien had already become quite skilled at riding a horse. Up ahead, Loren was calling them to come eat. Not long ago, the 3 of them traveling together had been far too conspicuous. Her uncle still had some loose ends to take care of, so he stayed behind. He arranged for his niece to use the name Diana, and once they reached the port of Clotia, they were to stay at an inn with a red signboard and live under assumed names from then on. From now on, she no longer had to carry everything alone. Just like that, Lavina and her uncle parted reluctantly, and she went into hiding in a small village in neighboring Clotia. The person who had always supported Lavina was called Loren. He was gentle and kind and treated Lavina like his deceased niece, which made him especially protective of her. Her manuscript was also nearly finished. The polishing was almost done, and it should not be long before it was completed. On their way home, they suddenly noticed that the front door was open. A man walked out from inside. It was Sedley, Lauren's youngest brother, who had always stayed abroad researching insects. This was the first time the two had met Sedley, and he stared fixedly at Lavina. The person before him looked strangely familiar. Ever since that curious first encounter with Diana, Sedley had already been staying at the house for 10 days. Though in such a large estate, the two did not run into each other often. Whenever Sedley saw Diana, he would slowly make his way toward her. It left Lavina rather embarrassed. Loren even apologized for his brother's rude behavior. Although Sedley had caused her some trouble, this was, after all, someone else's home, so she could not say much. Speaking of Sedley, Loren said there was a large age gap between them, so he had practically raised him like a son. Sedley was a bit eccentric, but very smart. He had a photographic memory. Later he became interested in birds and became an associate professor at a foreign university. But their father had hoped Sedley would assist his brother in taking care of the family business, and from then on the two grew estranged. Still, Sedley earned himself a sum of money through his knowledge, then resolutely cast aside both the family's expectations and his professorship and became obsessed with minerals. Then, in just 1 year, he obtained a master's degree. It was said that he was now preparing for doctoral studies. Seeing that, their father had no choice but to give up. He just still wasn't very mature. He was already 32, yet no one knew when he would marry and have children. Loren quite wanted grandchildren. After finishing his homework, Damien wanted to go to the mine with brother Sedley. Sedley came over and said that since the child arrived here, aside from the farm outside the estate, he had not gone anywhere. There were so many beautiful places here. It would be such a waste to spend the whole winter like this. Lavina was troubled. Damien's health was still not very good, so she said no. It was simply too dangerous there. Sedley said she was being overprotective, like a nervous mother hen. Furious, Lavina slapped him on the spot. There were some things you did not say in front of child, some things that should never be said. With that, she turned and left with Damien. Loren told his brother to go apologize at once, but Sedley stood there blankly and said, "But hens are useful and cool. I like hens best." He thought of Lavina blushing and found it rather adorable. Loren said no. She looked exactly like the late Angela, so much alike they could have been twins, and both had once been fiancées of the Duke of Dibbins. Diana was the niece of their benefactor. If his brother intended to toy with her or tease her carelessly, Loren would be very angry. Sedley promised that he was not toying with her, though at first he had simply been curious how the heroine of a tragic story had ended up in such a small mountain village, and was even staying with relatives of the Duke of Dibbins' deceased fiancée. Loren said helplessly that if Lavina did not like him, he should give up cleanly and decisively. Sedley smiled and said he was confident. On Lavina's side, before she knew it, she had written all the way until dawn. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, there was freshly delivered milk and eggs. From then on, every morning there would be a card, along with fresh eggs and milk, placed outside Lavina's door. This time, flowers had been sent. That person always delivered food at cockcrow. If she wanted to know who it was, all she had to do was wait and see. So the next day, she secretly stood watch outside the door. Sure enough, she found someone there. It was Sedley and Damien. Her son ran over happily and said it had all been Brother Sedley's idea. Since Mother always skipped breakfast and stayed in her room writing, they had thought of this plan. Sedley had written the notes. Moved, she thanked him. Sedley changed the subject and asked whether Lavina wanted to try milking cows together, if she knew how, that is. Lavina was full of confidence and made a wager with Sedley over who could milk more. The loser would grant the winner one request. From then on, the three of them slowly grew closer. During the days when Lavina was writing, Sedley kept helping care for Damien. The diamond in his hand was beautiful. Sedley said that compared with diamonds, he preferred cat's eye stones because those stones contained 8 different colors. It was especially obvious in sunlight. Usually the stone looked plain and ordinary, but under the sun it gave off a dazzling brilliance. In the past, Lavina had found the man before her incomprehensible. Now, however, she had begun to change her view of him. Sedley gave her the gem as a gift to celebrate the publication of her work, and also as an apology for saying she was like a hen. Lavina knew she had gone a bit too far at the time, too. She did not know where she'd gotten the courage to slap someone like that. Back then, she had been the Duke's mistress, enduring everyone's stares every day. It had tormented her inside. But now she ought to be living as herself. She did not need to care at all about what others thought, especially in front of this man. She felt as if she had become an innocent young girl again. Sedley joked that she was the second woman who had ever hit him. The first had been Loren. As the two laughed together, Sedley suddenly leaned closer and said there was an eyelash on her face. Just then, Damien suddenly burst in calling for his mother. Lavina pushed Sedley away and asked her son what was wrong. Damien's face was full of innocence as he said there was a problem he couldn't solve. He also wanted the thing in Mother's hand. Sedley taught Damien that when he wanted something, he had to say, "Please." Damien obediently did so. Lavina felt awkward. After all, it wasn't hers to give. Sedley said it was fine if she really felt bad about it. Then why not go into town together over the weekend? Soon they arrived at the market. Sitting in the carriage, the two looked out the window. If this was a date, she definitely would not have come. The man before her was hard for Lavina to figure out. After getting out of the carriage, the two went to a bookstore. Sedley invited her inside with a mysterious smile. This was the special section for the popular new writer Diana. It was an excellent work, vividly portraying the life of an ordinary girl. But Lavina's book had not attracted attention from the very beginning. Her work first appeared in a small village bookshop run by an acquaintance of Lawrence. Later, a local reporter noticed her work and published a favorable review in the local daily, which drew attention to it. In the novel, the heroine is deceived by a cruel factory owner in the city and labors bitterly every day. Later, she meets a gentle, wealthy man, and the two fall deeply in love. But because of their vastly different stations, they painfully part. After enduring countless hardships, the girl finally succeeds by using her own talents. Later, she reunites with that man, and the two end up together. The story was common enough, but the work resonated with readers from every social class. After finishing the book, Sedley felt it had enormous potential because the protagonist in it was like an uncut gem, inherently radiant and able to astonish others. Sedley had already wanted to get her autograph in advance. Lavina was touched. Then, after visiting the bookstore, the two ate at a nearby restaurant. Suddenly, she overheard people nearby talking about the Duke's fiancée, mocking Klein for having lost two fiancées. Just hearing news about the Duke made her tremble in fear. There were rumors that the Duke had killed his fiancées, and that to commemorate his dead wife, he had built an empty grave in the mausoleum and recognized her as the 14th Duchess. He was preparing to make her portrait public. If that happened, the Duke would very likely find her again. Sedley draped his coat over her shoulders and said the weather was a little chilly, so they might as well go home after finishing their meal. Soon the two returned by carriage. Lavina fell into a panic, not knowing whether she should run again. When Damien saw them return, he came to greet them happily. Lavina grabbed her son's hand and said they had to pack now. They had to leave this place quickly, but her son shoved her away and shouted no. He did not want to leave. He did not want to keep hiding his name and fleeing from place to place every day. He liked to hear. Aunt Lorraine was here, Brother Sedley was here, and so were the little ponies. He had grown attached to this place. Damien's emotions broke down, and he shouted that his mother did not love him. Lavina froze. She had never imagined her son would say such a thing. Sedley stepped forward and told him to take those words back. Some things could not be said lightly, but Damien would listen to nothing and ran out crying. Sedley told her to let the child go. Once he calmed down, he would come back. Sedley poured Lavina a cup of hot tea. The man before her asked nothing. She said nothing either. Once she had calmed down, she felt she was the worst kind of mother. She said everything was for the child, but in truth, it was only for herself. She had never asked what the child wanted. Instead, she had simply assumed that being with his mother was what was best. The one who truly could not be without Damien was her. Sedley suggested that she sit down and talk properly with the child and ask what Damien thought. Lavina did not know whether to tell him. After all, the place they had lived before had been the child's father's castle. Escaping that place had also meant escaping his biological father. If she told the truth, she feared the child would misunderstand even more and think his mother was a selfish, terrible person. Sedley suggested she did not need to tell him everything. She only needed to say what the child could accept. From Damien's point of view, knowing something was better than knowing nothing. The child was very clever. Sedley spoke about his own childhood, about how his life had been controlled by his parents, who dictated everything for him. That suffocating love had left him unable to breathe, so he fled abroad. But that did not mean he hated them. It was only later that he understood his family's good intentions. But when he was young and disobedient, he had never realized it. Hearing that, Lavina was very grateful. Even so, she still had to leave. If that man found her, the consequences would be unimaginable. Sedley felt that fleeing forever was not a real solution. He did have an idea, one that would let them avoid moving and evade that man's pursuit at the same time. They could change their identities completely. He had long since learned Lavina's true identity. The sea wind was fierce. The Duke stood at the bow of the ship. Outside, everyone was saying that he had killed Lavina. This was the price of the blood-stained Dibbins family. If it truly was punishment from God or the devil, he wished he alone would suffer it. They said that those who died unjustly, if their obsessions were deep enough, would become ghosts and could only ascend to heaven once their grievances were resolved. The Duke believed Lavina had become a ghost as well. After all, she hated him to the bone, a man like a curse, who had ruined her innocence and sincerity, and through the Dibbins family curse had caused both her and her son to lose their lives. How could she not hate him? He truly wished that even if Lavina existed only as a ghost, that would still be enough. Zeno stepped forward and said the portrait had already been made public. Once the mourning period ended, he would have to marry a new wife and fulfill his duty. They would arrive in Clotia tomorrow, and after that he would have to return to the capital at once. The Duke had deliberately gone by way of Clotia, not only to open up a brand new trade route, but also because the painter had compared Lavina to Clotia's goddess. The Duke's expression darkened. Perhaps she was hiding there. As long as he had not seen her body, he would never believe Lavina was dead. Late that night, Lavina had a nightmare. Klein had found her after all and grabbed her by the arm, saying she would never escape. Lavina jolted awake. Sunlight streamed warmly outside the window. A startled cry rang out. Lavina had changed her hair color. Both Loren and Sedley said it looked beautiful, and her son had finally calmed down and come to see her. He even apologized to her first. Lavina also admitted her own fault and proposed dyeing their hair as well. Loren came over and said they only needed to lie low for a while. Sedley came to her side and quietly asked if they could talk alone. Once they were in a room by themselves, Sedley said he had thought of a perfect hiding method, a way for her to live entirely as Diana. Picking up a flower from a vase, he said it might be a little rushed, but proper ceremony was still important. Sedley held the flower out to her and said that if she wanted a perfect place to hide, she could borrow the identity of Sedley's wife. Long ago, Sedley had already noticed that this woman looked exactly like his niece who had died years before. She could have stayed with her child and enjoyed wealth and luxury, yet she had risked her life to flee abroad. That overwhelming curiosity had made Sedley unable to let go of her. Lavina was talented at writing novels. Once published, they would surely become a great success. Though there was a risk of being discovered, Sedley had thought of an identity that would not be questioned. The state would issue identification papers and proof of residence to a citizen spouse. If she wanted to change her identity completely, becoming his wife was the best option. Lavina's expression turned rueful. Proposing with a flower plucked from a vase, there was not a shred of elegance in it, and it was not romantic at all. Lavina took the flower and said she would not agree, because Lavina thought Sedley was joking, but Sedley was serious. The next day, Lavina was fast asleep when her son crawled over and woke her up. Loren had already dyed his hair golden, and he looked adorable. Damien mentioned Sedley. Since yesterday, Brother Sedley had stayed in his room and never come out. He had not even touched the food left outside his door. Loren had gone into town first thing in the morning, saying there was something he had to do. Lavina smiled. Children who do not eat or sleep properly are bad children. They would go scold Sedley together. So the two went to his door. Lavina worried Sedley might still be asleep, so she sent her son away first and told him to bring some food. While he was gone, she slipped quietly inside. She found Sedley asleep on the desk. Sunlight fell across his face. The scene was peaceful and beautiful. Loren had once told her that Sedley was like a child. If he did not eat or sleep on time, please help keep an eye on him. The room was a complete mess, and the curtains had not even been drawn. When he wrote before, he had probably been like this too. Lavina nudged Sedley and told him to wake up and eat, then go rest in bed. But when Sedley woke up, he refused to get up, saying he still had a lot to do. Lavina teased Sedley, saying it was a good thing she had not accepted his proposal. Otherwise, the extra person by her side would not be a husband, but an overgrown eldest son. Sedley suddenly sat up. This wicked woman, Lavina, had just rejected him, and now she was saying things like that. Lavina felt Sedley was still too young. He deserved a better, more beautiful woman. And even if Sedley were joking, she could not accept feelings like that. But Sedley's face suddenly turned serious. He was not joking, and the kind of person suited to him did not need to be defined by anyone else. He liked exactly the sort of woman who came from an ordinary background, was clever and lovely, and even had a son. And he did not need. Lavina immediately answered that this whole matter was only for her sake. But Sedley truly meant it, just as the atmosphere was becoming delicate. Fortunately, her son came over and said they should all go see the fawns. The three of them went out into the snowy field together. Afterward, Sedley acted as if nothing had happened and played with the child as usual. Soon they spotted a family of deer. Damien was thrilled and wanted to go closer to look. Sedley handed the child some feed and told him not to get too close. Sedley and Lavina watched from nearby, chatting idly. Suddenly, Damien let out a scream. Lavina was so frightened she could not move. The first person to flash through her mind was Klein. Sedley had already rushed forward and freed the child's leg. He told Lavina to hurry and fetch the doctor. He would take Damien home first and tend him. Lavina hurried out to find the doctor, unable to ignore the voice inside her own heart. In that instant, the first person she had thought of was still the Duke. After examining him, the doctor said the injury was not serious and would not leave a scar. He just should not walk for the next few days. Sedley stepped up to ask about the situation and only relaxed once he knew it was not serious. This time, it was all thanks to Sedley. She had been so shocked that she froze on the spot and had nearly caused a disaster. Sedley went out and brewed her a cup of tea. It carried the fragrance of mugwort. It was a plant from her homeland. Lavina had not had it in a long time. Sedley said he liked the scent of this tea very much as well. When Lavina understood what he meant, she spat out a mouthful of tea. Sedley pretended not to understand. He said he was obviously talking about mugwort tea. After Sedley pulled that little stunt, she was not as tense as before. Sedley had been drawn in by Lavina's charm. Her very first published novel had been a great success. She had given birth alone and raised the child with all her heart. With rare seriousness, Sedley said he liked Lavina. He wanted to become her husband and Damien's father. But at the same time, he did not want to pressure her. Perhaps they could start as friends. Lavina smiled and agreed. Sedley was happy like a child. Lavina smiled lightly. Whether it was because of Sedley's steady voice or the scent of mugwort tea from home, she temporarily forgot the Klein in her mind. No one had expected that Damien, who should have broken his fever quickly, would instead worsen. The doctor said he had a rare illness with no known name. Cases like this had never been seen in the country before. The child had already been weak to begin with, and after being injured by the trap, he developed a high fever. It had likely caused complications. Lavina collapsed to the ground in an instant. Sedley asked if there was any other way. The doctor said there was a special medicine from abroad that could ease the illness, but only a few pills remained. The capital had that medicine, but a blizzard was raging outside. The roads were blocked, and carriages could not pass at all. The moment Sedley heard that, he said he would go. Lavina and Loren would stay with the child. Loren did not stop him and instead began preparing his luggage. He would set out at dawn. Then Loren embraced Lavina and told her not to worry too much. Everything would get better. Just like that. A week passed after Sedley left. Every night, Lavina cared for Damien until dawn. Sometimes Damien would briefly regain consciousness, but once the fever returned, he would fall back into a stupor. When the child woke, he even asked where Brother Sedley was. If he had not been so willful back then, Brother Sedley would not have had to brave the wind and snow to fetch the medicine. Lavina held the child's hand and said Brother Sedley would be back soon. Loren came over and asked about Damien's condition. The letter and medicine Sedley had sent had already arrived. He had injured his foot along the way and had no way to return for the time being. Lavina was deeply moved. The child also wanted to know how Brother Sedley was doing. Sedley had said before not to hide things from the child, so they told Damien the truth. The child asked his mother to go find Brother Sedley. She had always been an excellent rider and would surely arrive safely. And with Loren here, he would be fine on his own. Loren also came over and told her not to worry. Lavina steeled herself. She was going to the capital to help Sedley find the medicine and bring it back to save Damien. Meanwhile, the people in the assembly hall were already getting irritable. It was almost dawn, and that person still had not come. Even worse, word was that it was not the Duke himself who had come this time, but his representative. By the time it reached dawn, just as they were about to leave, the sound of the door opening came from the entrance. Someone walked in from afar against the light. It was the Duke of Dibbins, after all, and this time he had brought a gift. Everyone opened it curiously, but the white-haired old man was so frightened that he threw it away at once. An eyeball rolled out from inside. Klein had been followed the moment he disembarked, and now he had returned the man to them. Since they were so dishonest, the Duke took out the medicine and said that such a thing was quite scarce on their side. What a pity. The bespectacled man hurriedly tried to stop him. He offered the Duke a sincere apology. The man before him was Owen, the only one who had not sent a spy to follow him. The Duke kept walking forward and accepted the man's apology. Then he called him out alone. He had heard that Owen was the only commoner among them. He wanted to cooperate with the man. As long as he found the woman in the picture, he would be given the special medicine. Owen recognized the woman in the photograph at a glance. So the rumors that the Duke was searching everywhere for someone from his past were true. Before the Duke left, Owen had one more thing. It was an invitation. Please, both of you must honor us with your presence at our residence. At the train station, Lavina arrived in the capital. Sedley came to meet her there. The moment Lavina saw him, pain welled up in her heart. He had grown so haggard. Sedley took her hand. The carriage was just ahead. Because of the medicine Sedley had brought, Damien had gotten much better. But the medicine for the child had not yet been approved. Importing it here counted as illegal smuggling. Though the approval paperwork had already been submitted, it was said it would still take a year before formal authorization was granted. If that happened, the medicine Sedley had found last time would be nowhere near enough. Fortunately, Sedley had obtained an invitation to a masquerade ball hosted by a highly influential person in this place. As long as they made a connection with this person, they could find the medicine. Lavina wanted to use the reputation of the writer Diana to enter the capital's social circles. Sedley worried her identity would be exposed. Lavina said then they would disguise her identity and have her pretend to be Sedley's wife. On the Duke's side, an invitation had also arrived. Owen had a daughter who had already reached marriageable age. It seemed he was trying to create an opportunity for them. Though it was a clumsy trick, it was rare to have the time, so he might as well go have a look. Lavina and Sedley went to a tailor's shop to prepare the clothes needed for the banquet. Based on her appearance, the shop owner prepared 3 dresses. Lavina instantly felt pressured. Standing behind her, Sedley said there was no need to worry. She naturally radiated beauty. A person's beauty had nothing to do with looks or clothing. It naturally flowed from the way one spoke, behaved, and the impression one gave. The clothes were only a small token of his feelings. Choose the blue one. On the way to the ball, Sedley explained what sort of merchant the host was. His masquerade was quite famous because there was a surprise event during the ball. At first, it was like any ordinary masquerade. Everyone introduced themselves and socialized freely. Then, when midnight arrived, the lights would be turned off for 10 minutes. Everyone would search for their companion in the dark. And if the person in front of you turned out not to be your original partner, then you still had to kiss them. Lavina was shocked after hearing this. Sedley explained that in a setting like this, people hid their true identities, so it became easier to reveal their secrets. Once they arrived at the ball, she introduced herself to everyone precisely as Mrs. Sedley. Everyone assumed she came from an artistic background and was very interested. One of the ladies teased Sedley for actually getting married. After all, he had always been strongly opposed to marriage before. They wondered what sort of woman his wife must be to make Sedley surrender. Lavina was put in a difficult position. Fortunately, Sedley stepped in to get her out of it, saying that the two of them had only registered their marriage and had not yet held a wedding. Not want to say more, he pulled Lavina away first. The two of them went to a corner. Lavina worried that they might have seemed rude just now, but Sedley comforted her and said it was fine. Lavina was a little nervous. Sedley said that at a time like this, the more important thing was to stay calm. From now on, they would split up. Compared with moving around together as husband and wife, this would make people let down their guard more easily. 10 minutes before midnight, she was to go to the terrace on the left. At that time, she would hide behind the curtains, and Sedley would head there as well. Using the excuse of gathering material for a novel, Lavina began asking around for information. Someone recommended that she ask Owen, the host of this banquet. On the surface, he looked like a respectable businessman, but behind the scenes he was collecting all kinds of dirty money. This was an important piece of information. She turned to leave, planning to tell Sedley. Before she realized it, however, it was already time for the event. The banquet hall was dim, and she missed her chance to reach the terrace on time, so she could only feel her way forward. Halfway there, a red-haired man grabbed her wrist and tried to force himself on her. At the critical moment, fortunately, another man appeared. He knocked the red-haired man unconscious. At first, she thought it was Sedley, but when she looked closely, it was not. She wanted to leave at once. However, the man directly wrapped his arms around her from behind. He even called out her name, Lavina. Klein leaned close to her ear, pleading with her not to run away again. At that moment, voices came from outside announcing that time was up and the event had ended. Struggling to her feet, Lavina escaped directly through the window. Outside, Owen was in high spirits. This masquerade ball had been a complete success, and all the guests looked satisfied. When he saw the Duke approaching, Owen waved excitedly, wanting to introduce his daughter to him. But the Duke's expression was cold as he asked for the guest list from the banquet. He also ordered the temporarily hired etiquette hostesses and maids to be gathered. The Duke's fierce manner frightened Owen badly. He hurried off to find them. The Duke knew clearly that that woman was still alive. After that banquet, Lavina received many invitations. Owen's daughter-in-law was preparing to host an afternoon tea tomorrow, and Lavina planned to go visit Sedley first. She was worried that he might be overexerting himself. Lavina hooked pinkies with Sedley, and he promised that if he felt tired, he would come back. Now, even if they were only a temporary married couple, it was only after Sedley left that she could show her own vulnerability. Ever since seeing the Duke that day, she had felt vaguely uneasy. This time, she had to find what she needed and then return to the Loren estate. Maybe that day had only been an illusion. Lavina attended the afternoon tea with her invitation. The person before her was Owen's daughter-in-law, Miss Bioli. She wore a mask, claiming that she had burns on her face. Miss Bioli was very fond of the novels Lavina wrote and could even clearly remember the lines in them. There was one scene in which the male and female leads confess their feelings. Fate had already been decided. Even if it hadn't been, I still would have fallen in love with you. Miss Celia was also her fan. She recited that line as well. She was Mr. Owen's daughter. The three of them briefly introduced themselves to one another. Celia said regretfully that at the masquerade ball, she had not had the chance to meet the distinguished guest. She wondered whether she would have another opportunity later. For some reason, whenever the topic of a distinguished guest came up, Lavina thought of Klein. The conversation soon came to an end. Bioli said that her wedding would be held in a few days and that she wanted to ask Lavina for advice about the ceremony. Lavina would soon be returning, and Miss Bioli said that when the time came, she would definitely invite her to the wedding. In the carriage, Lavina removed her mask and thought that she had finally become a little more familiar with the ladies. She wondered how Damien was doing. On the Duke's side, the search had still not been abandoned, and he suspected Lavina had used a false name. Just then, a carriage passed in front of them. From inside the carriage, Klein saw the person he had longed for day and night, and immediately rushed after her. Sedley was waiting for her at the door, a bright smile on his face. Just as Lavina was wondering why, Damien suddenly pounced on her. The snow on the roads had melted, so carriages could travel again. At the doctor's suggestion, he and his uncle had come to the capital together. Lavina had never expected to see her child here, and she was overwhelmed with joy. Klein, meanwhile, failed to catch up to the carriage. His face was filled with pain. He even began to wonder whether he had gone mad. Gino stood there in silence. At that moment, he truly wished Lavina had really died on that island. It would have been better for both of them. On Lauren's side, his leg was almost fully healed, and everything was going smoothly. Looking at Damien, Lavina felt emotional. Sometimes she felt he had grown up so quickly, and sometimes she felt he was still just a child. Sedley joked with a smile that if she still wasn't happy, then her husband would take the child out for a walk and come back later. Just then, a maid came in to clean the room. Sedley covered her mouth and only relaxed after the maid had gone out. They had to be careful about what they said here. After all, the maids were not their people. Perhaps this act would be over soon. Sedley wanted to fight for himself a little and asked Lavina what she thought. Her gaze drifted. Sedley was a good man. She did not dislike him, but neither could she make her heart move for him. To Damien, Sedley would be a good father, and she herself could live a peaceful life. But if she truly did that, it would be unfair to Sedley. He deserved someone who loved him with all her heart. Yet Sedley embraced her and said he did not mind. Since Lavina's heart had already been hollowed out, then he would fill it back up with his own. Lavina was deeply moved. Sedley stood up and said it was time to sleep now. Tomorrow morning, they still had to attend Miss Bioli's wedding. Before leaving, Sedley said that he would keep waiting for her. Soon, the day of the wedding arrived. Because Sedley's leg was inconvenient, Lavina went to help get some juice. As she walked, she was still thinking of looking for Celia, but accidentally bumped into someone. The drink spilled all over the floor. Looking up, the man asked in confusion, "Diana?" The man before her was a stranger. He had seen her with Sedley just now and could not help asking about it. Lavina was startled. For a moment, she had almost thought the man in front of her was the Duke. She took another glass of wine and went back. Miss Celia took the initiative to chat with them and even introduced her father to them. The two exchanged a few pleasantries. Sedley and Owen got along very well, and the two became interested when the conversation turned to chess. Owen even wanted to ask Sedley to be his teacher. Sedley agreed. As payment, it would be enough if he could read some of Rudbiff's valuable books. The man sneaked out to the outskirts and knocked on the carriage door. Inside sat the Duke. Following his master's orders, the man had checked the information on all the women who had attended the banquet. Most of their identities were clear, but Diana was a little strange. She had only recently appeared in social circles, and she wore a mask over her face. Her hair had also been dyed, so it was not obvious from a distance. But up close, her original hair color could be seen. Because the distance had been too great, however, the man could not determine what the original color was. She was Sedley's wife, and they had held their wedding last year. This time, they had come to the capital to look for medicine to treat her nephew's illness. On the surface, none of this seemed connected, yet there was one common point. That was her nephew. The Duke took out a stack of money and ordered the man to investigate that woman's whereabouts. That woman had once said she wanted to become the novelist Lavina, and perhaps she had already fulfilled that dream somewhere beyond his reach. Sedley and Owen began to play chess. Lavina occasionally joined in with a few comments from the side. Celia came over to keep Lavina company. The timing was perfect for drawing information out of her. From what Celia said, it seemed she admired her father greatly and wanted to become a merchant when she grew up. Lavina fell silent. It looked as though Celia did not know that Owen had been involved in illegal smuggling all along. The two of them went to the study, where Celia led her to the fiction shelves. Lavina also looked at other books from time to time, such as this fairy tale book she had read as a child. Celia looked surprised when she saw it. A distinguished guest staying at the residence had chosen the same book, and he was staying in the guest wing tonight. A shy, girlish look appeared on Celia's face. Just then, there was suddenly a sound at the door. Celia pulled Lavina into a corner to hide and said it was that person.